Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second part of What If Naruto Woke Up from a Coma with an Unknown Power. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Tazuna the bridge builder was happily sipping his sake in Wave Country. To be honest, he had no idea how many he'd had, but that fact alone told him he'd had plenty. Maybe too much, but he felt it was understandable because he was celebrating his country's increasing success. The bartender asked the heavily inebriated man, "Those kids were great, weren't they, Tazuna-san?" "I'm still shocked that they managed to defeat Gato," gushed one of the bar's customers, his tone tinged with excitement. The grandfather said arrogantly, but with a hint of sadness, "Well, you need super ninjas to protect a super bridge builder, such as myself." Tazuna smiled drunkenly at the man. "That blonde Gaki wasn't well when they left, though," he said, worriedly frowning. Damn it, he had come to like that kid. As the Nami no Kuni drunks reflected on their bewhiskered hero, the atmosphere in the room momentarily soured around him. The bartender trailed off, frowning slightly. "Hey, how'd they do it, Tazuna-san? I know shinobi can do things no one else can do, but to defeat that many men." Tazuna responded, relieved to be out of the solemn atmosphere. Some super powers that even other shinobi couldn't do, I think. Especially that Uzumaki kid." A hooded figure on the opposite side of the bar started to listen in more intently, but no movement suggested interest. With inquisitive eyes, one of the customers asked, "Superpowers? Like what?" Hummed the bridge builder, mentally rubbing his chin. Even though it had no effect on his coherence, chugging the entire drink seemed to improve his memory in some way. The man appeared somewhat more alert again, as though the memory itself had somewhat sobered him. "Well, that Kakaka.shi guy was super strong. He had a funny eye and a rarishing. And that Yushimiki Gaki did something alright. He. But not enough to stop him from speaking softly for the next few words. It wash terrifying. He let loose this feelin', and I suddenly felt ash if I wash nothing more than an ant." And then he rattled. Like the change on an anchor. I think their Shenzhai called it the Congo Afusha. Even though their heart was beating so fast that it could break the ribs above it, the masked figure stiffened slightly and grinned slowly. Jackpot. The hooded figure stood and walked to the bar's entrance after Tazuna had left, not even bothering to pay their bill as they left the village. Nami no Kuni as a whole, still waiting to hear anything else of interest. They had knowledge. And that meant you were pretty much set in the shinobi world. Selling it to the highest bidder was all that was required. The phrase, Chishiki. Knowledge, Ryotenben no Onoki of both scales, the Sandame Tsuchikage, was waiting to meet with a contact. The Tsuchikage's assistant rolled out a summoning scroll with a wave of his hand as guidance. A hooded figure of moderate height emerging briefly before a seal matrix flashed. The old cage could see glowing amber eyes beneath the hood. As usual, the figure's voice was devoid of emotion and any characteristics that could be used to identify the figure's identity or even gender. "Allow me to thank you, Onoki Dono, for seeing fit to provide the agreed upon amount for my services," the figure said. However, the eyes alerted the powerful man to the distinction between this shinobi's identity and his typical interactions with the organization he represented. Tsuchikage gave a snort. He fixed the hooded figure with a stern look and said, "I have no interest in playing your games now, little spy. Present your information and be gone." Even though he didn't like it, it was common for Gokage members and even small-time village chiefs to be delivered leads on information from other factions across the nations. Although there were spies in every village, getting information from them usually came at the risk of exposing the agent to their targeted village because of suspicious behavior. As a result, the majority of villages relied on information from outside sources that could subsequently be verified or disproved using factual analysis. After all, a spy would know exactly what to look for instead of having to sift through a ton of classified material in order to find anything potentially relevant, making it much easier to confirm a report. Naturally, the term classified was frequently used to the point of near redundancy, and the information that was actually pertinent was rarely included in a physical record anyhow. Thus, in a world based on deception, darkness, and lies, spy organizations flourished. Some shinobi had recently surfaced, identifying themselves as Chishiki. They conducted business in a distinctive manner by distributing scrolls containing the agreement for the purchase of information to their customers. The scroll contained 2 summoning matrices, a small seal for sending non-organic objects to the sender, usually Ryo notes, and a larger seal to call a Bunshin to the scroll's location and transmit the information. The elderly Cage had initially attempted to have his shinobi enlarge the smaller seal to a size that would enable him to send shinobi to capture them, but ultimately the endeavor had been unsuccessful. It had simply dispelled the summoned Bunshin when he had attempted to hold it in a similar manner. Onoki had previously used the organization on multiple occasions, including one that was crucial to Iwagakure's future as one of the Great Five. Let's just say that the Tsuchikage took Chishiki's communications very seriously. The amber-eyed figure said, of course, taking a scroll from their robes and showing it to the assistant of the Tsuchikage for examination as usual. Your information, delivered with a smile, Onoki. Dono. When it was judged safe, his assistant handed the scroll to the elderly Cage, who started reading it. Although he maintained his stoicism on the outside, he was struggling internally to keep up a facade of indifference. And the damned spy knew it, too, based on the faint tittering of laughter. This. Onoki started, gazing intently at the hooded figure above the scroll. This changes things, he told me without hesitation. He had an idea. He glared at the hooded figure and demanded, how many other villages have you supplied this to? Now, the amber-eyed person reprimanded, wagging an accusing finger at the fabled shinobi with tanned, black, nailed nails. The figure cried out, that would be telling, and they moved quickly forward at Onoki's growl. The figure said, by your leave, Tsuchikage, bowing mockingly just before the elderly Cage, as usual, vaporized a portion of their torso. As the Namami Bunshin, living flesh clone, broke down into a seemingly boneless heap of flesh on the floor, Onoki hardly even batted an eyelash. Then, at an incredible rate, it disintegrated into a heap of dust and dirt. 1. He would have this fixed because this child would be a serious threat to his village's future, right away. Onoki said simply, get me the Anbu badger, and his wish was fulfilled. As he read the report on his desk, the Yondaime Raikage, scowled. He raised his gaze to his receptionist, Mabui, who nodded, and asked, and this information is valid? Indeed, Raikage. Sama, she declared. Following the communique we were sent by the non-affiliated spy group known as Chishiki. We sent payment as you directed, and they responded with sending us a scroll, containing a Namami Bunshin. A Namami Bunshin? Asked E, suddenly taking it seriously. You're certain? E gave a low growl in response to Mabui's nod. Namami Bunshin was a device that created a clone from a user's sliver of flesh and multiple dirt clumps using Kuden, flesh release. Even for the Namami clan members who employed them, the technique itself was extremely challenging. The Namami clan were Kumo shinobi, which was E's biggest issue. That is, all clan members ought to have been wholly devoted to Kumogakure and Kumogakure alone. Thus, the presence of a rebellious member of the Namami clan was. It's alarming, to put it mildly. Mabui proceeded, unaware, or perhaps studiously ignoring, her leader's state of distraction. From there, the Namami Bunshin provided us with the below information before dispelling, she said. The Yondaime looked intently at his assistant and asked, have you verified it? With all due respect, sir, it is entirely impossible for us to gain access to the Uzumaki. If there is, indeed, an Uzumaki in the first place. To check. Unless we want another international incident, like the one almost a decade ago. Mabui said, raising an eyebrow incredulously and giving the muscular man a level stare. Before choosing the best course of action, E frowned and nodded. The woman hurried off to follow his instructions. Have our spies in Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire, attempt to confirm the existence of this Uzumaki. And get me Darui, he said. In the meantime, he thought about the information at his disposal and how he would handle the situation if it turned out to be accurate. Soon after, the door opened and the finest shinobi in E came in. Yo, Raikage. Sama, the Jonin said, slumped beside the door and saluted languidly. You called for me? Darui, the dark-skinned Cage said, staring at his father's pupil with a piercing gaze. It has been suggested that the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, has emerged in one of Konoha's shinobi. Darui straightened to full attention, his eyes growing serious and alert, his slouch gone. Suggested, Raikage. Sama? E gave a solemn nod. He gave his shinobi a moment to gather his thoughts and stopped choking on air before continuing, saying, we are still working to confirm the information that was brought to us by the unaffiliated spy organization Chishiki. Their information suggests that the child who supposedly awoke the Kusari is also the Kyubi Jinchuriki, and the child of Uzumaki Kushina and Namikaze Minato. I want you to take Team 14 to the upcoming Chunin exams in Konoha, the Raikage told the Jonin. Naturally, Darui was accustomed to covering for Team 14's sensei, who was prohibited from leaving the village. You are to have Team 14 briefed on the appearance and supposed abilities of Uzumaki Naruto, as well as have them spy on him and any other potentially powerful up.in coming Konoha.nin, including the last Uchiha and Hyuga heiress. A country that had an agreement of non-violence with the host village, such as Kumo, had no reason to be excluded from the Chunin exams, which were normally only attended by allied nations. A Kumogakure team should have no trouble competing in a Konoha hosted Chunin exam, but Kirigakure or Iwagakure would be completely disqualified. Above all else, Darui, I want Team 14 to make it to the finals of the Chunin exams. All other mission parameters may be ignored, as long as this last one is achieved, although it would be in the best interests of those involved if all parameters were completed. I intend to attend the finals myself, stated the Raikage, since he had instructed C to surreptitiously observe the first exams to be held in Kiri since the end of the civil war that engulfed the country following the assassination of the Sandaime Mizukage. This was the best chance for a Chunin exam. With the end of the 3-year war, the muscular man had been happy to learn that Kirigakure was truly destabilized. Kiri's continued status as one of the 5 great shinobi villages was a miracle. With his composure back, Darui raised an eyebrow in curiosity and asked, I thought I was to track down Takara? After all, Takara was an extremely dangerous kunoichi due to her skills and her knowledge of Kumogakure, so it wasn't like they could risk having her on the loose. She was somewhat of a priority because she was the first S-rank Nukenin to come from Kumogakure in more than 2 decades. Under the guidance of the Sandaime Raikage, she was also C and Darui's teammate. Like Darui, she wielded the Rantan, Storm Release. Although his subordinate's second eyebrow lifted to join its compatriot, he said nothing, instead bowing and turning to leave the office. This takes precedence. I want to see that child's talent for myself, and I need a powerful Jonin to go with Team 14. In regards to Takara, I'm going to have Yugito track her down, he replied. By your leave, Raikage. Sama. Yugura stood with his back to the door, looking apathetically out over his village, Kirigakure. How long ago did I? What is causing me to feel this way? Kiri. Now, he had been living with it for years. His desire to defend Kirigakure was acting against his desire to destroy, and his emotions were always at war. He had always loved his village, so he had no idea where these feelings were coming from. As a child, he had read about Kirigakure's history with unmistakable horror, about the gruesome battles and the torture techniques his village used. He had read about Kirigakure Saizo, the Shodai, who had unified all of Mizu no Kuni under one banner by conquering it all and establishing himself as a dictator over the populace. After his passing, the nation was left without a leader until Hizuka Fumio, the Nidaime Mizukage, gathered all of the 7 swords and gave one to each of his 7 guardians. Although his death at the hands of the Nidaime Tsuchikage had plunged the country into yet another political nightmare, his reign was regarded as the best Kirigakure had ever known. Yuki Aida, a lieutenant in the Shodai, had succeeded in securing the position of Mizukage after that. The name, Chigiri no Sato, Village of the Bloody Mist, was given to Kirigakure because of his violent and cruel rule, which carved a bloody passage through their history. Kiri then erupted into a 3-year civil war after he was killed in his sleep nearly 12 years ago. Finally, at the age of 15, Yugura emerged victorious. Kirigakure and the shinobi world at large had been profoundly impacted by each of the previous Mizukage. For better or worse, more often. Since he was a little child, Yugura had aspired to be the best, most compassionate, and most adored of them all. What had changed, then? He was somewhat aware. He would never reveal to anyone how much that still hurt him, but it had begun around the time Isobu stopped speaking to him. He had made numerous attempts to get back in touch, including going into his mindscape to plead with his lone friend, the Sanbi, to speak with him, but for some reason he was unable to do so. He had even contemplated tightening the seal again in an attempt to start a fight, but each time he did so, he got sidetracked. He merely said, "Report," and his subordinate started going into great detail about what was written in the scroll in front of him. Like usual, he could feel the pressure in the back of his mind as he listened. He was still unsure of when it began, but he resisted it as usual, but to no avail. He only knew that he felt as though a tiny part of his soul was dying each time he lost it. Was this the reason Isobu had left him? Because he was damaged? Track down this Chishiki, and have them executed. Do not allow this information to spread, understood? Yugura looked up. He had no idea why he had said it. In mild confusion, Yugura gazed out over the village as the Kiri.nin frantically followed her cage's orders. Something was seriously wrong with him, and he had to discover what it was. It would be the end of them all otherwise. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki has awoken the Kongo Fusa, Madara told him, the legendary shinobi's expressionless mask showing no emotion. Kami frowned across from him. Pain asked, already projecting how to get around this minor issue, how much shall this delay our plans? He had once met Kushina when he was younger, but she was only 3 years old and probably didn't remember him. Years later, he had been shocked to find out that she was still alive, and after the conversation with Yahiko, he had actually planned to ask her for a leave of absence. That guy. To see if he could find his old sensei and distant cousin again. It was unprecedented and generally worrisome that the Kusari, a strong bloodline that would have been very helpful to Pain, if he was honest, appeared in another child so quickly. Well, it didn't matter because it was a Jinchuriki. He would eventually come to know Pain, as would every other person of his kind worldwide. However. How? He asked, reverting to his typical exterior indifference out of sheer need. None would likely survive his wrath if he acted on his emotions, which were bottled up grief, anger, and other things he ignored for years. No, Pain was long past the pointlessness of feeling. Kami was above such things. Madara shrugged in an emotionless tone. The man's response contained a small error, which was only brought to light by the slightest hesitation in the middle of his sentence. I'm not entirely sure. Since Kushina used the Kusari after falling pregnant with the child, it is likely that this has something to do with the Kyuubi, as unlikely as it seems. Whatever the case, Pain noticed enough. Although the expression seemed completely fake on the normally expressionless figure, Kami raised an eyebrow in mild curiosity. You did not inform me that the current Kyuubi Jinchuriki was Uzumaki Kushina's child, he simply stated. It's more of an observation than an accusation. After hesitating for half a second, Madara answered indifferently. Would it have changed things? Instead of responding, Pain chose to give the renowned shinobi across from him a stern look. He said absently, I wonder what else you have misled me about, and the two men exchanged long looks. With a low hum, the masked shinobi vanished in a whirl. Kami stayed in the room, wondering how Akatsuki's strategies and plans would have to change to accommodate this new development. With a look of complete indifference, Terumi Mei fixed her gaze on the man in front of her. It was definitely not anticipated. She said, Pardon, Momochi-san. I don't think I heard you correctly, in a monotone that revealed nothing. Is this man thinking I'm a fool? She thought, fighting the impulse to scowl. They were on the verge of achieving a resounding victory in a long, running war to liberate their country, and now this. A man had suddenly appeared and offered to assist. In order to better support the weight of the blade on his back, the Kirigakure no Kijin, demon of the hidden mist, grunted and rolled his eyes. His voice was dark and rough. He said, that I would like to offer my assistance in your efforts to depose Yagura. Mei made small, thoughtful noises in the back of her throat and arched an eyebrow imperiously. And why, Momochi-san, should I trust you? You took part in a previous effort to depose the Mizukage. Why should I not believe you merely wish to assist in killing him, only to turn on us and take the Mizukage's seat for yourself? The man glared at the dual bloodline holder with disgust and gave a low growl. If you think I would have rather stood idly by and allowed that madman to remain seated in the Mizukage's office, then you are sorely mistaken. Mei was not convinced. Yes, of course, Momochi-san, she sarcastically drew lead, her disbelief almost tangible in the cramped chamber that held the leader of the rebellion, hidden away in a long, forgotten bunker that had been abandoned by the Hizuka clan as a remnant of the Warring States era. And I'm sure the notorious Kirigakure no Kijin has chosen to help us poor, lowly rebels out of the goodness of his heart? The man sat back and looked haughtily at the kunoichi, a grin that was decidedly unfriendly but was poorly hidden by the bandages on his face. Can you afford to not take me? He asked with ease, his smile growing as her face wavered a little. Thought so. Where do I begin? Uncertain of what to do, Mei cast an uneasy glance at the man. Being one of the few surviving shinobi who had fought Yagura, and a former member of the Seven Swordsmen at that, would undoubtedly support their cause, provided that he had good intentions. The question that had been bothering her from the beginning was finally asked. Why now? Why, after so many years, have you returned now, supposedly to help us? The man sighed, his eyes grew serious, and his tone and face lost all emotion. I found him as I fled Mizu no Kuni after my failed coup. He was a survivor of the Yuki clan. Mei suppressed a gasp, sorrowful at the idea that a survivor of the tragic clan had survived, only to die before Kiri could be changed. My apprentice died just recently. And Zabuza trailed off, recalling the battle in Nami no Kuni with blinded eyes. The Kongo Fusa has emerged in the son of Konoha no Kusari. Takeyatsu, chain cyclone of the leaf, and, I'm assuming, Namikaze Minato. The woman widened her eyes. Naruto woke up 4 days later. Sasuke frowned at him and asked, "Why do you fight?" It was painfully clear that they were both making a concerted effort to be friendly as they sat across from one another on Naruto's hospital bed, which undoubtedly made things simpler. For a moment, Naruto hummed in contemplation. It was an odd way to begin a conversation between them, of all the ways. To be fair, though, it was even stranger because Sasuke started the conversation in the first place. Frowning, he trailed off. For what reason did he fight? To be the Hokage instantly came to mind, but Naruto thought that was untrue. He no longer genuinely desired to be Hokage. Although he still longed for the title, he felt that his opinions would, and maybe should, shift as a result of his world being turned upside down. His initial thoughts on the subject were influenced by the stranger's remarks regarding valuable individuals in Nami no Kuni. The Sandaime, the Ichirakus, and Iruka Sensei were among those who fit that description, though fewer than he would have liked. However, his previous objective, the cause of his ambition to become Hokage, also sprang to mind. Recognition. He desired to be seen by the Konoha residents. Since he was real, they had to acknowledge that he was real. Sasuke nodded thoughtfully as he continued, softly, "I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. For my friends and family. To be recognized. I want to prove people wrong, I suppose." Naruto felt obliged to inquire, "And you?" Since Sasuke ought to respond if he did. In response, the Uchiha gave a monosyllabic grunt. Naruto gave an eye roll. "I'm sorry, I don't speak gobbledygook, Uchiha-chan." After a moment of hesitation and a growl, Sasuke let out a sigh. The Uchiha were massacred in a single night by a man named Itachi, he stated. In response, Naruto nodded. Aside from the name, he was aware of that. In response, he spoke with a fierce, burning passion. The monster that killed them was my elder brother. I fight to avenge them, because that is all I can offer their memory, he said. Naruto suppressed his sadness at that moment. Your own brother. Sasuke knew that feeling would not sit well with him. He wouldn't like it when sadness veered too close to pity. Instead, the blonde whispered, and then, "You can't live for just one thing, Sasuke. What happens when you achieve it?" The Avenger gave a shrug. Simply put, then, I restart our clan, he said. Naruto gave a snort. Sasuke, I hate to break it to you, but I'm more Uzumaki than Uchiha. I only managed to awaken the Sharingan through a fluke, truly. It's because I have Uchiha DNA on both sides of my family, he continued, recognizing the Uchiha's interest. My dad was half Uchiha, and my mother 1/4. The Raven scowled. Who were they? He knew a little more, of course, but he was hardly going to tell Sasuke that he was Uchiha Madara's great-grandson. I can't tell you. I don't know myself. It's just what the Hokage said. He had no idea how that would be received. You know nothing? Sasuke asked, his tone and eyes tinted with courteous incredulity. TCH, I doubt that, Usuratankachi. Naruto let out a sigh, however, the mere thought triggered a memory in him. Look, all I know is where my Uchiha ancestors are, Sasuke. I know my Chan's father was half Uchiha, as was my father. He heard the voice of the person he could only assume was his father stating their names, and his mother noticed a picture on his father's mantelpiece. He still couldn't quite place his father's image, but he thought the two individuals in the picture ought to have made it obvious. It didn't, not yet, anyway. Actually, he started, pretending to frown to persuade Sasuke of a sudden shift in his memory. My father's mother was called Uchiha Kazu. She had the same eyes as I do, and long purple hair held in a ponytail. Naruto couldn't help but feel that Kazu was an incredibly beautiful woman as he looked back at the picture from his memory. Actually, about the same as his mother. Sasuke acknowledged with a nod. I can look up some facts about her for you, if you'd like, he said. They sat in silence for a while after Naruto gave a nod of agreement. Naruto was the one who broke it. He whispered, everything is going to be different between us now, isn't it? The Uchiha answered, HN, as though that clarified everything. Fortunately, he went on. Only if we allow it to. Naruto returned, staring intently at his distant relative, and should we? Should things go back to the way they were before? The Raven gave a headshake. No, he said, strangely firmly. A single tomo in his left eye and two in his right formed in his eyes as he said, "We're family. You're the last I have, and I'm almost the last you have. We may be distant, yes, but we share these eyes." Sasuke went on. "We wept the same tears of loneliness. In different forms, perhaps, but still overall the same. We know what it feels like to have nothing. And that is stronger than even our distant familial relation." Despite himself, the Uzumaki gave a wistful laugh. "A brotherhood of blood? One?" In fact, to the blonde's surprise, Sasuke nodded. He replied, "It seems fitting," to the Jinchuriki's inquisitive stare. Incredulously, but with a strange mixture of feelings he couldn't quite put his finger on, Naruto nodded stupidly. "Brothers, then," he said, reaching his arm halfway to the Uchiha, without attempting to explain them. Sasuke took it in his hands. After 2 days astonished and disgusted, Naruto looked up at the Hokage monument. Minato. Minato Namikaze. Minato Namikaze. His father's name was Namikaze Minato. He was the son of the Yondaime Hokage. What? The real fuck? Ignoring the burn of tears in his eyes as memories flashed before his eyes, he let out a shaky breath. In his mind, he saw fleeting glimpses of conversations, fleeting smiles, and a lot more. He knew he would experience them in their fullness in his dreams, but he was unable to fully comprehend one before another flew in and replaced it. These days, he always did. Father. 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 To the detriment of his sanity, the word kept repeating itself in his head. He backed away from it, enclosing himself. As the village Jinchuriki went into a mental breakdown, the passing villagers studiously ignored him and barely gave him a glance as they went about their daily lives. Naruto was no longer annoyed by their indifference as he had previously been. Rather, he found himself in the icy embrace of knowledge. He shuddered in realization as it hammered a tattoo of comprehension into his brain. Minato.kun and I have faith in you to be able to constrain it and harness its power. Minato.kun and I have faith in you. Have faith in you. Faith. A new understanding blossomed in his mind as his mother's words took over the old mantra. He could not and would not pretend that the warmth in his heart was just the sensation of the midday autumn sun beating down on him. Despite his anger and fear of the world his parents had abandoned him into. For someone who had never even met them or even known their names, his parents' belief in him was like a bandage applied to a long, standing, old wound. There was probably never a balm to it because his own parents were the ones who had abandoned him, leaving him alone in a village that detested him and making him bear a heavy burden. But something to let the wound heal and to lessen the pain a bit. It would undoubtedly leave a scar on his soul, but he could disregard it because he now knew its beginning and extent. The sting was less intense than before. But in another sense, it still hurt and was a wound on his life. It wasn't as easy as it used to be. He now had a terrible knowledge as well of what most likely took place. He was selected as Jinchuriki not only because he was the best option, but also because there was no other option. For himself, for the future, and for Konoha. He would have done the same thing, despite how much he detested admitting it and how much it hurt him. Whether he had been Kushina, Mito, or himself, he would have done the same thing. The same thing he had done. He did not pass judgment, he also detested it, too. After 2.5 weeks dodge. Make a swipe. Parry. Kick. Take a sidestep. Take a lunge. Dodge. Dodge dodge DOD. Sasuke's kick struck Naruto's stomach, sending him flying backwards, and he winced. He felt the gratifying crunch and splinter of bark beneath his feet as he angled his body to make contact with the tree feet. First, he launched a chakra. Enhanced lunge forward and launched a steady barrage of attacks on the Uchiha, struggling to get past his defenses. In response, the Raven exploited Naruto's style weaknesses to manage blows to the Uzumaki's person and parry the ferocious attacks. Naruto had recently changed his outfit, wearing knee-length shorts of the same color and a black long-sleeved shirt. His right shoulder displayed the blood-red version, a representation of the lost that is frequently seen in Konoha, while his left shoulder displayed the classic cobalt blue Uzumaki spiral. He had on an orange belt with tiny spirals on it and orange shinobi sandals. The fabric had been dyed the same vivid orange, and his Hite.8 forehead protector now rested flat against his throat, positioned to protect his jugular. He had 2 sealing scrolls seated at waist level on his right, and a kunai pouch was worn on his left thigh. In addition, he had gradually started to grow out his hair in a manner akin to his father's, something he was genuinely enjoying. Although it wasn't quite as long yet, it was gradually starting to show after a few weeks of neglect. When Kakashi yelled, "Naruto! Sasuke!" they all turned to face him. They shrugged shamelessly when they saw that a few of the other genin were blinking at them. When they said, "That's enough. Come over here," Kakashi turned to face the other genin. Copy.nin, a resident of Konoha, took care of their genin while the other two sensei took a day's rest. "Okay, you lot, who can point out where Sasuke and Naruto made their mistakes?" Shino was the first to raise his hand and speak after Kakashi nodded at him. Naruto.san seemed to begin one attack, and then hesitate and switch to another. Furthermore, he also appears to be accidentally mixing up his attack styles. Why could I tell this, you may ask? Because I can recognize both the standard Konohagakure Taijutsu Keita and another, unknown style emerging and interchanging frequently in his attack patterns, to the degree where he is seemingly attempting to combine both. The Abarame's reply was as always monotony. The young Jinchuriki scowled and insisted, "It's not my fault," before continuing. The statement goes, "If I didn't have." Well, Kakashi Sensei knows. In fact, he did. Because he would inadvertently slip into another Keita whenever he slid into one. Naruto was having a terrible time learning different fighting styles. This resulted in a jumble of attack patterns that he couldn't even make sense of. Since it was happening slowly, it was a regrettable consequence of the memory merging. Kakashi merely raised his hand to signal a pause. He said, "And Sasuke?" And Shikamaru answered this time. Sasuke was overconfident in his attacks. He kept assuming that Naruto wouldn't manage to sneak past his guard, and then being caught entirely unawares when he did. The style he was using also seemed to be incomplete to some extent. The brunette slouched. He lay on the ground and stared at the clouds while he leaned back and held his head in both hands. Taijutsu practice is troublesome. But Kakashi nodded, ignoring his last remark. The silver-haired man said, "You are right on the first subject. Sasuke, we will work to improve your habits in that regard," and the Uchiha slowly nodded in agreement. As for the second, however, that was primarily because Sasuke is training with the Sharingan, and is likely growing unused to having it deactivated for a fight. Again, this is something we will work on. Why? Choji inquired inquisitively. Isn't a Kekkei Genkai something worth using as often as possible? They're a massive advantage. Sakura and Kiba nodded in agreement with his conclusion. Surprisingly, Hinata was the one who responded. She explained softly, blushing slightly at the attention. Kekkei Genkai require a lot of chakra to use, and while Sasuke-kun has more than most, he still doesn't have more than a chunin. He can't really afford to keep it running for too long at a time. Her voice grew even softer as she said, "Since I also have a dojutsu type Kek. K.K Genkai. I also have that page problem. P+, speaking quickly and almost insidiously. P. Possessing a Kekkei Genkai isn't everything." Huh? Kiba inquired, his tone full of interest. The Inuzuka sounded rather put out by that thought, looking almost petulant. Having some super awesome Kekkei Genkai would be amazing, though, all I have is my clan's traits. Ino took charge this time. All of the other genin, including Kakashi, nodded in agreement with her statement, but Kiba did so reluctantly. Well, if you think about it, Kiba, a Kekkei Genkai is just like any other shinobi skill, except only some people can use it. If you grow too reliant on it, then your other skills will suffer. Naruto started by highlighting himself, and besides, he said. The boy's tone was full of pride in his kindred, but it also contained a deep well of sadness at being the last of what was once a prominent clan. Clan traits are technically passive Kekkei Genkai, like the Uzumaki clan's chakra. We were known as the Choju no Ichizoku, clan of longevity, because we generally live 10.15 years more than almost everyone else. Even other clans, like the Senju. Kiba gave a snort. He said blithely, "Hey, can't be that amazing since they're not around anymore," and Naruto gave a low growl in response. It's interesting to note that the Inuzuka frowned and all of the other rookies gave him an accusing glare. What? The impending chakra signature only made it easier for Kakashi to step in and stop things from getting worse. That'll be us for today, kids. Run along home. Naruto, Sasuke, Shizune's here for you. However, based on the way his head had turned toward her, the blonde had already deduced that. The copy.nin were occasionally startled by the fleeting bursts of amazing sensing he was displaying. Naruto had amazing skills, and brief. Sometimes he would excel as a sensor, and other times he would have trouble. He occasionally used his Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, in a way that briefly gave him the appearance of his mother. Sometimes he fumbled around the precision that most inexperienced nin would stumble over, and other times his fingers flicked through seals with the ease of long practice that he hadn't really put in. Furthermore, it wasn't just his jutsu. He had a changing personality all the time. At times he was cocky, at other times unsure. Sometimes bold, sometimes considerate. Quiet, loud, courteous and sardonic. Patient and overly eager. His allies were unsure of how to react to him and what to think of him because of the ongoing, fluctuating emotional conflict. That is, aside from Sasuke. However, Sasuke was already dealing with too many psychological issues to be concerned about the unstable mental state of the young Uzumaki. With brief goodbyes, all of the genin started to get up from their positions. Shikamaru had just reclined in the grass and started to observe the clouds when Shoji took a seat beside him. For what was probably some kind of beauty day or shopping spree, Sakura and Ino pulled a grumpily struggling Hinata off toward the shopping district. The brazen Inuzuka argued with his stoic counterpart the entire way as Shino and Kiba made their way to their clan compounds. Then Naruto and Sasuke got up and approached Shizune, who smiled warmly as she entered the clearing. Tsunade was unsure of how it had occurred. For some reason, the child had infiltrated her house. Somehow, he had developed a good relationship with Naruto, and they became so close that they demanded he move in with them. Of Asani, they insisted. Old Sarutobi's comments that it was a bloody brilliant idea and that he ought to have come up with it sooner had not helped either. The brat wasn't stuck with him. Naturally, Naruto had stated that he would not stay if Sasuke was unable to. Triad. Damn it. She was now also living with Uchiha child. Furthermore, Jiraiya is adamant about remaining in their house. To care for our godson. As he had demanded. Things were becoming absurd. Who comes next? Haruno? Hitaki? Well, no. Tsunade resisted thinking those things. She didn't need the entire damned set of gakis. As soon as he was discharged from the hospital, Naruto left his apartment, but he refused to sell it. It had been decided to keep the building as a storage area and extra living space after talking with Sarutobi, who had described the circumstances surrounding the apartment and Naruto's subsequent sentimental attachment to the building. We're home, Tsunade. Obasan, Aunt Tsunade. A voice that was becoming increasingly recognizable yelled. And that fact made her very happy. Shizune walked behind the two young shinobi as they strode into the house, grinning kindly as they spoke to the Uchiha. Tsunade eagerly embraced Naruto tightly as he approached her. When she broke the embrace, the Senju said, "Have a good day, Gaki." The younger blonde smiled broadly. "Yeah, I landed a couple of good hits in on Sasuke here," the Uzumaki said jokingly, pausing briefly to elbow his stoic cousin in the side. "And didn't cop as much of a beating as I could have. Who knows, maybe I'll finally show this prick the who one day soon." He then proceeded to elbow the younger Raven once more, but the boy deftly sidestepped the blow. Sasuke said, completely unruffled, "HN. Maybe," and Tsunade rolled her eyes while Shizune and Naruto laughed. Shizune kindly asked the two boys, "What do you think you two will go and do now, then?" Sasuke and Naruto exchanged glances. Everyone knew that Naruto's statement, "I'm going to go take a power nap," was code for, "Pop my clones like balloons and assimilate all the information, skills they've gathered." Weeks ago, the Senju woman had given up trying to persuade her godson to train with less risk because, like Kushina, he was too obstinate. As if anyone was interested, Sasuke declared, "And I am going to go do further research into Uchiha Kazu and her past," but at least Naruto and Shizune did. Based on the appreciative smile he gave the Uchiha and the kind smile she gave the boy. Tsunade nearly scowled. Tsunade and Shizune nodded, and the two left, excited to get started on their assigned tasks. Inoichi greeted Hiruzen as he walked into his office, saying, "It's not working well," and Hiruzen blinked. Not really daring to believe what he thought the man was saying, he said softly, "Pardon." Such a complication was definitely beyond his means. Not with his current level of busyness. The head of the Yamanaka clan sighed. Sarutobi gave the idea that the phenomenon might be contagious, some hazy thought. "I'm seeing few results with the treatment of Uzumaki Naruto. Well, rather, I'm seeing results, but he regresses just as fast. Take yesterday, as an example. Last I saw him, he was doing well. Yesterday, he'd completely reverted to how he was before last session happened. Abrupt, snappish, sour, somber, it's like he's trying out a lucky dip of emotions. I swear I bore witness to the entire spectrum, today. And now, he's encountering memories of when Mito was a mother, and both of them winced. That was not something he particularly wanted to go through." The Sandaime gave his chin a contemplative rub. "Do you have any ideas on how to fix this?" "Well, I believe that I can only offer so much to Naruto-san. It would be Prudent for him to undergo counseling with another Yamanaka as well, preferably a mother, the man admitted at last. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed as he weighed the possibilities. Although it seemed like the most logical solution to the issue, the risk of adding another person to the already enormous body of knowledge about Naruto was incredibly risky. Not to mention that, despite being uncommon, Yamanaka traitors were nearly impossible to find because they were skilled at using jutsu to conceal their own treasonous ideas from prying eyes. The Sandame asked, would Tsunade not be enough? She is the foremost expert on healing the physical brain, and has much experience working with Yamanaka who suffer excessive recollection. Inoichi frowned and slowly shook his head. I considered that, I will admit. However, Naruto is already struggling with his emotions regarding Tsunade. Sama enough. Adding the therapist-patient relationship to their interactions isn't going to help anyone. Plus, I already have someone in mind. Hiruzen inquired, and who would that be? Yamanaka Mitsu. Sarutobi let out a sigh before nearly growling. Triad. Damn it. Sigh no more, you old fool. Very well, he scowled in agreement. You have my permission, but keep it quiet, Inoichi. The younger man gave a nod. He said, of course, Hokage. Sama, and left. After finishing that, Hiruzen went back to thinking about his predicament with the Ikenban, Honored Opinion Watch. Following the meeting where he had informed them of recent developments, they had met 3 times, and he was gradually becoming aware of noticeable irregularities. He was far more supple and amenable to suggestions in the meeting room, losing any decisiveness he had before entering. It seemed like a conditioned response, but he was still unsure of how it was conditioned. In addition, he sensed something strange about the chakra presences in the space, but he was unable to identify it. He was thinking of inviting Jiraiya, rather than Tsunade, as that would be a mistake and a half, to accompany him to the next meeting so he could try to figure out what was wrong. The professor decided to open the Fuin no Sho, Scroll of Seals, and review the Kinjutsu inside after furiously rubbing his forehead. He hoped to discover some clue as to what was going on. The other option was, he didn't want to think about it. With Kurenai to his right and Asuma to his left, Kakashi took a seat in front of the genin. The rookies all stared at him curiously as he held little sheets of paper in his hands. Sakura was the first to receive it. With a startled expression, she looked up at her sensei and exclaimed, those are elemental chakra papers. The other genin awoke with curiosity as she asked, are we discovering our elemental affinities, Kakashi? Sensei? The jonin with silver hair gave a nod. He looked directly at Sasuke and Naruto, who grinned, respectively, and said, yes, we are. Normally, elemental chakra manipulation is done once you reach Chunin level, but since you are all a unique case, both in that some of you know some elemental ninjutsu, and you are, in general, the next generation of Konoha, it seems prudent to speed this process up. Especially with the Chunin exams in a few months. He trailed off a little in thought, and the genin raised their eyebrows. With a hesitant voice that betrayed his nervousness, Choji asked, the Chunin exams? You're going to enter us into them? Kurenai gave him a nod. She replied with a gentle smile to the anxious Akamichi, yes. The Hokage wants the next generation available to show off to the visiting village leaders and such. Hokage. Sama says that both the Raikage and Kazekage are showing interest in attending the exams, as well, so you'll likely be fighting some of the most powerful genin of those villages. Evidently, her grin concealed her unpleasant news. Choji appeared quite alarmed, as did a few of the others. Asuma told them, don't worry, though, we're going to train you hard in more powerful techniques, now that you've got your basics mastered, while lighting up. They had, for the most part, mastered the fundamentals, and it was true. Although Naruto was still unable to perform a basic Bushin no Jutsu, clone technique, he had improved his chakra control to the point where he was able to perform his Kage Bunshin, shadow clone, once more. This was initially impossible for him because of how his poor control had gotten worse when his chakra reserves suddenly quadrupled. At this point, he possessed about 4 times as much chakra as Kakashi, 3, together with taijutsu. Speed had been a significant consideration. Their sensei rated the majority of them as Chunin level in both disciplines. Additionally, they had all undergone intense training in the body flicker technique, also known as Shunshin no Jutsu. The technique had come naturally to Sasuke, Hinata, Kiba, and Shikamaru. On the side, Sakura practiced some genjutsu that Kurenai had taught her, and the clan, born shinobi, had all practiced their clan techniques and or Kekkei Genkei. Additionally, Sakura, Hinata, and Ino had been diligently studying some scrolls on the fundamentals of Iryo ninjutsu that Tsunade had graciously provided. The Kongo Fusa's original release was extremely powerful. After that, training was required to increase the number the user could sustain at any given time, their ease of use, and their level of control over the technique. Naruto himself had also gradually worked on improving his Kusari usage. Naruto had barely been able to hold a 5-meter chain for 5 seconds during his first conscious attempt to use the chains. He was now up to 2 for 20, or double the length for 30. In addition, he had been practicing calligraphy and fuinjutsu, but even with the memories of his forebears, who were both masters of the art, it was slow because there was muscle memory to develop and there were a lot of levels to master in fuinjutsu. He was gradually advancing to their level of expertise and understanding, currently only broaching the third of 20 levels. It was challenging, though, because although he was familiar with powerful examples like the Mahi Fuin, Paralysis Seal, and Fuinjutsu, Chakra Bando, Sealing Art, Chakra Bind, among others, he was still unable to use them because his penmanship and chakra control were still lacking enough to create such strong seals. And they would either not activate at all or would if he wasn't cautious about that, paranoid, and picky about how well they were done. Attitudes that were obviously ingrained in Mito, Kushina, and himself. Violently. Before he reached the required level of mastery, he had lost a Kage Bunshin, or 20, to practicing fuinjutsu that were just too difficult for him. Even a henge, transformation, had been out of his grasp for the first week or so, and his chakra control had not yet advanced to the point where he could employ any kind of genjutsu. However, he had been putting a lot of effort into it, and with the aid of his Kage Bunshin, he had been able to enhance his control to the point where, like all of his classmates, he could effortlessly direct chakra to his feet for tree climbing and water walking. His senses had escaped him, in part. He still lacked the control to fully utilize them, and they were fluctuating in a very odd way. Since he was still having trouble with chakra control, he couldn't expect his sensing abilities to be especially strong for some time. Sensing was a talent that required a higher level of chakra control. But even as they were speaking, Naruto had about 100 Kage Bunshin in the Senju compound practicing chakra control, another 40 practicing the mental balancing techniques Inoichi had taught him, and another 10 reading and rereading historical books and scrolls to gain perspective on both his past memories and the present. Kakashi interrupted, grinning at the kids. Anyway, he said. As soon as he finished saying, Sasuke appeared in front of him, followed closely by Kiba and Naruto. Let's get this show on the road. Who's first? The others formed a more systematic line. But first he held up the paper for everyone to see. You will need to channel a small amount of chakra into the paper. If you have a natural affinity to Kaden, the paper will ignite and turn to ash. If you have an affinity to Futon, the paper will be cut cleanly in two. If you have an affinity for Raiden, the paper will wrinkle. If you have an affinity to Doden, the paper will turn to dust and crumble away. And if you have an affinity to Sweden, the paper will become damp. The strength of your affinity is shown with both the order it occurs in, if you wield two natural affinities. Which is, in and of itself, rare. And on the degree to which the change takes place. For example, said he channeled chakra into one. He held it up as it crinkled dramatically and instantly. My affinity is for Raiden. Remember, of course, that you can use techniques outside of your affinity, but they will be less effective, cost more chakra, and require stricter control. He gave Sasuke one after saying that. Regardless of their prior order, every other rookie gathered to watch as the Uchiha directed a tiny quantity of chakra toward the paper. It crinkled violently at once, then caught fire and burned slowly to ash. Asuma blew a whistle. Two natural affinities. Nice, kid. Sasuke's eye twitched slightly when he was called kid, but the Jonin either ignored or failed to notice. He nodded to his counterpart, who nodded back. By the looks of that, your Kaden isn't overly hot, he said, evoking a collective moan. But your Raiden affinity is pretty damn strong. Kakashi will be the best to help with the latter, and I'll do the former. Sasuke grinned. Next was Kiba. He took the paper and pretended to channel his chakra into it. The paper quickly turned to ash after catching fire, shocking Kiba into dropping it. The genin laughed, and Kakashi laughed at what he saw. He glanced back at Kurenai and Asuma for a moment before turning back to the Inuzuka and saying, that's a powerful Kaden affinity, Kiba. All three of us are capable of Kaden ninjutsu, and while Asuma has the strongest affinity for it, I have the best techniques, so we'll likely work together to train you on that. He studiously ignored Asuma's muttering displeasure, instead focusing an eye. Smile on the smiling genin. Naruto came next. Ha, Kiba exclaimed, and his smile became noticeably arrogant. After discovering that he had a strong affinity, he was obviously feeling a little elated. Ignoring the soiled looks he received and Sasuke's low growl, he declared, "Bet the Dobi doesn't even manage to have an affinity at all." All three of the Jonin scowled. Now was not the time to deal with that attitude, but they would have to do so. But Kurenai did give him a stern "Kiba" in reprimand. After giving a small smile and rolling his eyes, Naruto directed his chakra into the paper. What transpired was a performance that few of them would soon forget. Still resting on Naruto's palm, the paper split cleanly down the middle with a startling speed. But right away, the right side of the paper ignited and burned itself to ash, while the left side crinkled. Kurenai, in spite of herself, gasped. She whispered, "I have never seen an individual with 3 affinities before," barring the Sandaime himself, her tone tinted with surprise and amazement. She raised her head to meet the blonde's eyes and was briefly taken aback by how unfazed he appeared to be. He must have realized what a feat this was. And of such potency, she said, faltering a little as she sensed an odd sensation in the air. She turned to see Asuma smiling at the boy in an unusual way, with a gleeful aura. In fact, she recoiled in disbelief. "What the?" he said. "Oh, I am going to have so much fun with this kid," with the exception of Sasuke and Kiba, who both gazed at the hand with a mixture of disbelief and jealousy, particularly in the case of the latter. Kakashi was staring at the boy's hand next to him in shock, while the other genin were staring at the blonde in wonder. But all of this was disregarded by the Sarutobi. "God. I love this idea of Dad's, setting us up with 9 genin for 3 teachers instead of 3 for 1. Kakashi nodded and shook his head. "Asuma and I will train you in Futon and Kaden, and Raiden respectively, Naruto. But since you have 3 affinities, you'll likely have to do a lot of training on your own so that we can work with the other genin. Your Kage Bunshin should help with that," he said with a nod. Sakura scowled. That made no sense at all, so she asked, "But Kakashi Sensei, how would clones help with Naruto's training?" The Jonin gave her an eye. Smile. The Kage Bunshin is a special technique, invented by the Nidaime Hokage. Naruto, however, is a user of the Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, multiple shadow clone technique, its greater counterpart. Knowledge and expertise gained by a Kage Bunshin is passed on to the original user, which means it can be used for both information gathering and training. However, he went on to contradict what Sasuke and Kiba stating, "The jutsu is incredibly chakra intensive. Only Naruto, as an Uzumaki and a Jinchuriki, can safely use the technique. The rest of you simply don't have the chakra to use it without potentially killing yourselves." In the ensuing muttering, Hinata took the initiative and accepted her chakra paper. The paper quickly became soaked as she channeled chakra into it, soaking her hands in the process. Kurenai gave a nod. She gave the girl a tentative nod. "That's standard for your clan, Hinata. Kakashi is our best Suiden ninjutsu user, so you'll work with him," she said. "That's a powerful affinity, though," the woman with the red eyes said, giving her a gentle smile. The young heiress gave a firmer nod, her own gentle smile lighting up her face. Next was Choji. Once more, it was a largely anticipated response. Asuma remarked, "A fairly powerful Doden affinity." "Nice, Choji," while his pupil wiped his hands on his shorts in an attempt to remove the grime that stuck to his sweaty palms. The Akamichi nodded, smiling a little, and smiled at his best friend, who returned the grin. "That's Kakashi's thing, again, so he'll work with you on that." Ino came next, and like the first 2 boys, she was practically bouncing on the spot, suggesting that she was eager to find out what her affinity was. In her hurry, she poured slightly too much chakra into the paper, but not enough to alter the result. One side of the paper wrinkled a little, and the other side got really wet. Kakashi remarked slowly and thoughtfully, "A strong Suiden affinity combined with a minor Raiden affinity is a good mix, Ino." He said, "Looks like I'll be seeing a lot of you," and she smiled back. At this point, Shikamaru posed the query that had been bothering a lot of them. "Anyo, Kakashi Sensei, how will you train so many of us at once?" It was Naruto who answered. He said simply, "Kage Bunshin," and Shikamaru turned to face him, raising an eyebrow in inquiry. It would make sense for a Jonin to be able to use the technique, and he had witnessed those of Naruto's Bunshin at work, but chakra is also passed between the user and the Bunshin. Naruto gave a calm explanation. Shikamaru and the others nodded at his explanation, and the 3 adults gave the blonde an approving glance. "It's the reason why the technique is as dangerous as Sensei said it is. The chakra of the user is balanced equally amongst the clones. Effectively, they can complete the same tasks as the original, although with less chakra. This includes teaching and utilizing jutsu." Sakura, who was constantly trying to surpass her rival, arrived after Ino. But as it turned out, this was not the case. "That's a good duo, Sakura," Kurenai said, grinning at the dejected genin once more. A reasonably powerful Doden affinity and a slight leaning towards Kaden. Sakura nodded firmly, feeling energized. "Mix those two with the genjutsu I'm showing you, and you could become quite the kunoichi," she said. The fangirl inside her was slowly dying with Kurenai's assistance. She would handle it. The one they were interested in was Shino, who came forward next. Although his clan generally avoided anything that did not use their kakaichu, the three Jonin were not even certain that the Aburame would use elemental ninjutsu. Nevertheless, the boy did take the paper and channel a small amount of chakra into it. When Asuma saw the outcome, a quick, sharp cut through the middle of the paper, he whistled. "Well, I'll be. 2 futon affinities for me to play with. Do you know if that is a common thing among your clan, Shino-san?" asked the man. Shino took a moment to think before answering. The three Jonin raised their eyebrows in interest but made no mention of it. "Generally, we do not check our elemental affinities, although I can see the logic in futon being the common affinity among my clan." Naturally, Shikamaru followed Shino, and the Nara lived up to his clan's reputation as having Kaden chakra natures, almost exclusively. It's not a particularly strong affinity, but it's sufficient to give them a starting point. Asuma said, "I'll help you with that, Shikamaru," and the Nara heir nodded while yawning a little. The muttered, "troublesome," was studiously ignored by the three Jonin. "Aside from your elemental training, Kurenai is going to be putting you through your paces in genjutsu training, and continued physical conditioning," Kakashi said. Some of the genin smiled and said, "We're also looking into doing some weapons training with those of you that want it." In particular, Sasuke and Naruto turned to face Kakashi in the hopes of learning kenjutsu. It's interesting to note that, for whatever reason, Shikamaru approached Asuma and asked for assistance learning bojutsu. The Sarutobi gladly complied. After that, they started training, after 3 weeks. Naruto had another memory from Mito's point of view while he slept. As she waited for her chance to advance farther, she was crouched and concealed in the shadows of the buildings on either side. Her stomach churned with regret. A deep-seated guilt that she usually buried was now very much present in her thoughts. Even though it was too late, she had to see her. Even though they had never met in person. Even in the event that. She gasped. Even in her death, she was, too. She was by Kami, and she was solely to blame. Mito tensed, ready to advance, but stopped when her husband's younger brother walked out of the room where her target was. 5 years earlier, when Hashirama had retired to help Mito raise their second child, Senju Katsuro, Tobirama had been the current Hokage. Although it totally blocked her abilities as a censor and user of the Kagura Shingen, mind's eye of the Kagura, her access to the Chakura Inpei no Jutsu, chakra suppression technique, was, of course, the only reason Tobirama hadn't noticed her. Additionally, she was unable to use her Kyuubi Chakura Modo, 9. Tails Chakra Mode, since doing so would transform her into a huge chakra beacon, negating any ability to stealth. Because it would require the use of chakra, she was unable to even employ a basic Maizigakure no Jutsu, hiding with camouflage technique. The biggest flaw in the Chakura Inpei no Jutsu was that it was disrupted if you used chakra of any kind, even for something as basic as walking. She was therefore forced to wing it, which caused things too challenging. At last, Tobirama and his 2 friends, Uchiha Kagami, the deceased's twin brother, and Uchiha Naka, the deceased's primary victim, rounded the corner and vanished from view. In order to avoid using any chakra to facilitate her actions, Mito leapt the distance between the 2 sides of the road, keeping an eye out for any seals that detect movement. A personal favorite of Tobirama's, and slapped a prepared Fuinjutsu Uchikeshi Fuin, sealing art negation seal, against the door, pushing it open in the same motion. She snuck down the hallway of Konoha's Anbu lab and quickly closed the door as quietly as she could. After all, a creaking, noisy door was a completely unnecessary safety precaution on Tobirama's part. Only the Hokage and a select group of close associates, Chief Scientist Shimura Hidenobu foremost, used the lab, which was not widely known in the village and only occasionally. Only Hidenobu and Tobirama were able to negate the facility's seals, which were some of the most sophisticated in the village. Okay, it wasn't for nothing that Mito was a leading expert in Fuinjutsu. The last time Mito had visited the facility was 6 years ago, when Madara's body had been in the morgue for a while before being interred close to the Valley of the End, as it had become known. By avoiding multiple traps and deactivating the separate seal on the door, she was able to locate Uchiha Yusu's body. This was a pretty good job, even by Tobirama's paranoid standards. Mito eased the door open and entered the room. The room had white walls and exuded a sterile stench that was typically only found in hospitals. To the right of the room was an ebony wood coffin that was absolutely crawling in fuinjutsu, which Mito immediately deactivated. On the left side of the room were some documents that probably described Yusu's injuries and crimes. For a moment, she hesitated, questioning whether she truly wanted to see. But in the end, she concluded that she just had to. So she did. She raised the lid of the coffin and saw the woman's entire body. Her flawless face, only slightly paler in death than in life, was framed by fiery black hair. She was wearing a plain white kimono, with a single, burnt left hand by her side. She had no flesh or bone under her hips, a clean cut that suggested a sword slashed with Kaden or Raiden chakra. The girl's son had just been born, as evidenced by a slight bulge in her abdomen, and at 16, she was really only a girl. One of the most influential members of Uchiha's emerging generation, she is 16 years old and expecting a child. And Mito's failure had shortened her life. The shadowed, blind pits where her eyes once were perhaps the most noticeable abnormality in the body, more so than the one blackened hand or the absence of legs. The sound of screaming roused Shizune, Jiraiya, Sama and Tsunade. Sama were both out that night assisting Sarutobi with some pertinent research, and would not be coming back for a few hours. She had gone to bed early because she was exhausted from a shift at the hospital. With Sasuke following closely behind her from the other side of the hallway, she dashed through to the room. She rushed over to Naruto right away, embraced him, and sat on the bed, trying her best to console the agitated blonde. He whimpered, "Yusu is dead." Shizune nay, exclaiming. Shizune was not a jonin for nothing, as she effortlessly held onto the sobbing form while he thrashed and writhed in her grasp. She noticed that his breathing was irregular and that he was hyperventilating. She simply tightened her grip on him. Her training temporarily left her when she witnessed the young boy's panic. It was all she could think to do. Shizune put an arm around Naruto's shoulder and sat him down after he had mostly calmed down. She gestured covertly with her other hand for Sasuke to sit on the blonde's other side, and the younger Raven did just that. Notwithstanding the Uchiha's interest, the woman said, "Do you want to talk about what you saw, Naruto?" Naruto's voice was quiet and he sounded uncertain. "I think, she was mourning someone. Yusu. Uchiha Yusu." With sharp eyes, Sasuke repeated, "Uchiha Yusu. How do you know that name?" After hesitating and exchanging glances, Shizune and Naruto agreed to just inform the Uchiha about the memory situation. They could rely on him because he was Naruto's closest friend and distant cousin. Sasuke, for his part, listened intently while remaining silent and patient. After Naruto finished, there was a pause before he nodded. "I believe you," he told the blonde, who grinned. "That makes sense. It explains the changes in your personality, and the times when you space out." He said, "Thanks, Sasuke," with sincerity. In response, the Raven nodded and grinned a little. Returning to the original problem, Shizune questioned, "You said you'd heard of Uchiha Yusu, Sasuke-kun?" The Raven's male snort. After a brief pause, he said, "Heard of her? She's the most notorious traitor to the Uchiha since Madara himself. Had she not been disowned, she would have also been my Oba-san, great aunt. She was my Ojii-san's grandfather's twin sister." For a reason even he didn't fully understand, Naruto fixed Sasuke with his intense gaze. He felt it belonged more to Mito than to himself, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Disowned? What happened to her? "I don't know the full story," acknowledged the Uchiha. "But supposedly, she used a genjutsu of incredible power to turn a fellow Uchiha against Konoha, forcing him to butcher dozens of shinobi. It was that victim, once he was redeemed, alongside his wife and the Naidame who killed her." Naruto gave a contemplative nod. Curious and a little confused, Shizune asked, "You think Mito Sama cared for this Uchiha, Naruto-kun?" Though it might have something to do with the birth of Atsushi, Naruto's grandfather, it was a strange thought. "She feels something for Yusu," Naruto remarked. "But I can't name the emotion, though I feel like I should be able to." Sasuke insisted, "Try," disregarding Shizune's disapproving glance. After a while, the blonde remarked, "Like what Oka-chan felt for me." His eyes widened in realization as he swallowed. "A mother's love." Sweden. Mazarapa, water release, wild water wave, rang out across training ground 4 the following morning. Sasuke came back with Kaden Gokakyu no Jutsu, great fireball technique, his jutsu colliding with Ino's in a chakra explosion. Steam started to build up over the training ground as the two elements fought each other, making it difficult to see the two genin. When the two jutsu finally stopped, Asuma cleared the steam by clapping his hands together and releasing pure futon chakra. He smiled and said, "Good work, you two." Sasuke grinned a little as Ino grinned at her sensei. Next, Choji and Kiba. When Kiba's own Kaden, Hosenka no Jutsu, fire release, Phoenix Sage fire technique, faced off against the Akamichi's Doden. Doryuheki, earth release, earth-style wall. Choji showed remarkable awareness and control over his element by simultaneously defending from the various angles the technique attacked from. The battle was called because Kiba's fire was unable to completely destroy his target's earthen defense. The Inuzuka bravely fought the urge to sulk. Kakashi remarked to the young brunette, "That was still quite good, Kiba." With renewed energy, the Inuzuka nodded and said, "Give yourself a bit more time and training, and you'll likely be able to match Choji." Next were Sakura and Shikamaru, with Sakura's Doden ninjutsu bravely opposing Shikamaru's Kaden until their sensei finally gave the order to release them, seemingly resulting in a standoff. Both of them were progressively mastering longer, more potent jutsu, but they were neither particularly chakra powerhouses, not even close to Shino or Choji, let alone Sasuke or Naruto. Hinata counterattacked Shino's futon, Shinkugyoku, wind release, vacuum sphere, with a shout of, "Sweden!" Suijinheki, water release, water formation wall. The Hyuga had to defend the wide range jutsu with vigilance. Eventually, though, Shino's attacks succeeded because he had more chakra than the heiress. They were prepared to proceed after a little healing. Very little damage was done, as Shino was careful to make sure. As the group's chakra powerhouse, Naruto was forced to use one of his jutsu against one of their senseis at the end. The Gokakyu of Kakashi did not hold back as it sped toward his pupil. Naruto revealed his jutsu just as Kurenai and Asuma were ready to step in, causing the genin to scream in surprise. Futon. Daitopa, wind release, great breakthrough. What? Is he crazy? Sakura pondered as her teammates' anxiety increased. You dolt, fire is stronger than wind. Imagine everyone's shock, however, when Naruto's wind defeated the Kaden with sheer strength and turned the fire on its caster, rather than strengthening Kakashi's jutsu. The defensive wall rose to his defense at the last second, and Kakashi's one visible eye widened briefly before flashing through the seals for a Suijinheki. Asuma cleared the resulting steam again, and Naruto smiled and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Don't try that at home, kids, the copy.nin said obligingly, grinning. Now, let's do it the other way round. Sasuke, Choji, Sakura, Hinata, Naruto. He yelled. Time to play offense. Naruto had his second meeting with the elder blonde that week, and he went to talk to Inoichi that evening. The room was one of several in the mental retreat of the Yamanaka clan, which traumatized shinobi frequently visit. The floor was a light cream carpet of the kind your toes could happily get lost in, and the walls were painted white. A window facing the Hokage monument was set into the right wall, and there were plants in the room's corners. The Yamanaka clan head was seated in a single chair at the left, diagonal to a long couch that was positioned against the wall opposite the window. Inoichi asked thoughtfully and slowly, "Do you have any inkling as to why Mito would feel motherly towards Yusu?" Naruto truly tried, but he was unable to evoke a memory. It wouldn't be triggered by any thought. "No, I'm sorry." With a slight smirk to indicate to the younger blonde that he was making a joke, he said, "Do you think you could have misunderstood the memory, at all? Isn't it possible you mistook a general fondness or something like that for something else? After all, I doubt you've ever felt a maternal instinct towards someone." After a brief chuckle, the Uzumaki said, "I don't think so. There was an intensity to it that makes me think it was more than that." The Yamanaka gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "Show me the memory?" The man entered Naruto's mind after he hesitated to nod, going over the memory and contrasting it with his limited knowledge of maternal instinct, which consisted of one or two mind walks into a mother's head. And the Jinchuriki appeared to be correct, he had to admit. Inoichi informed Naruto of this, and Naruto sighed. "It's bugging me. I feel like I should know already, but I just can't figure out why. I don't know how to figure it out, either," he stated with frustration. The man let out a sigh. "It's okay, Naruto-san. But maybe we can try to bring up a pertinent memory." "Not right now," he continued, as the younger blonde shifted uneasily. "I need to talk to you about something else. I have discussed your regression and your difficulties with the Hokage. He agreed that you need counseling in this regard. Physical aspects of experiencing Mito. Sama and Kushina." Sama's memories, Inoichi started, observing with some amusement that the younger's cheeks turned a deep red. However, I am unable to offer you the precise assistance you need. Inoichi then got up, walked to the door, remarked, but there is someone who can, and opened it. Standing in the open doorway was a short, androgynous figure with short orange hair, the same foam green eyes of their kinsman, Inoichi, but with a slightly lighter complexion than his, wearing a simple white outfit and exuding a quiet confidence, friendliness, and sympathy. Their voice was also androgynous, which made Naruto blink. Greetings, Naruto.kun. I assume that calling you that is okay with you. But before Naruto could reply, they went on, my name is Yamanaka Mitsu. Slowly nodding, Naruto seemed a little annoyed that someone would be looking into his head. No issues, Yamanaka.san. Inoichi.san said, can you assist me? Please, call me Mitsu, Mitsu said with a gentle smile and nod. Indeed, I think I can assist you, particularly with your minor memory issue. Recollection, Naruto said, turning his head sideways in bewilderment. Again, Mitsu nodded. Yes. We Yamanaka refer to people who have trouble understanding the memories and feelings they have in another person's body or mind by that name. Can you see how people who experience excessive recollection might be at risk, particularly in the way of life of a shinobi? When the blonde nodded, they went on, I specialize in treating people by training and conditioning their minds, as well as repairing their psyches, rather than using ninjutsu. A psychologist of sorts, if you will. 4. Naruto's eyes narrowed in thought as he gazed at the Yamanaka for a while. So, you're not going to pry into my mind? Is everything completed without using jutsu to break my brain apart and looking around? Indeed, but that doesn't imply that the process will be simple either, Mitsu said with a smile. It will take time, and it will hurt a little at times. The effectiveness of this treatment truly depends on the patient's strength and determination. This kind of treatment is not appropriate for everyone. When a flash of indignant anger appeared in his eyes, the two Yamanaka knew they had persuaded him. I can deal with all the conceit that a very short preteen could convey in 3 words, he yelled arrogantly. Inoichi gave himself a brief moment of hope that this might actually work out as he observed their interactions. Maybe. Perhaps. 1 week later Kurenai proudly said, you've all been doing very well, and she smiled as she said, with your heightened physical conditions and ability to overcome low-level genjutsu, and some more potent ones, I'd wager you'd all beat the average genin quite easily, even one-on-one. Asuma acknowledged, for those of you training in weapons, you're doing pretty damn well, and you're learning the bukajutsu, weapons techniques, trade tricks pretty quickly. And our 3 resident medics are also doing very well, he said, glancing at the 3 girls, who all seemed to perk up a little. You 3 are knowledgeable enough to treat the majority of common colds and injuries, according to Tsunade Sama. He was also grinning, his ubiquitous cigarette moving strangely with the gesture. With a lazy drawl in his voice, Kakashi smilingly said, you're all doing pretty well in your elemental chakra manipulation training. He took a moment to glance at Sasuke and Naruto and said, some more than others, admittedly, but you're all doing far better than would possibly be expected of genin. After all, it's pretty amazing that you've mastered 3 elemental techniques before you're even chunin. The exams are in a month, Kurenai went on, and you're all very good at the material and techniques. To make sure you know what to do in specific situations in the field, however, you need more experience. Sakura started thoughtfully and lowly, so. Mission, then? The 3 sensei could feel the eagerness in her voice and the noticeable arousal of interest in all the other genin, including Shino, as she asked. The 3 jonin nodded and said, yup. What could possibly go wrong, after all? As it happened, things quickly went wrong. The absence of their client, who had apparently fled, was the first clue. Wonderful. Regardless, the genin of teams 7 and 10 waited impatiently with Kurenai and Asuma, while Team 8, led by Kakashi with Ninken in tow, tracked the renegade actress. Asama Sandayu, Yukie's manager, was with them, detailing the remaining shinobi on their target. It certainly didn't help that Kiba, Choji, and Ino, and, admittedly, a part of Naruto himself, were huge fans of Fujikaze Yukie. Since Yukie Sama is so, she does not appreciate being sent across international borders for her career, especially to Yuki no Kuni, Land of Snow, he explained, frowning slightly, perhaps out of dissatisfaction or because he was trying to make his remark sound polite. What specifically does she dislike about that nation? Nonplussed, Sakura inquired. Oh, it's. Well, the cold is to blame, she is accustomed to high no Kunis. The land of fire. Warm climate. He tried to avoid his mistake and missed the narrowed eyes of Shikamaru, Sasuke, Naruto, and the 2 jonin. She doesn't appreciate being dragged to such a cold place for a simple movie, he said. However, isn't that preferable? After all, she can promote her acting abroad in this way, Ino added. His curiosity aroused, Shoji unintentionally prevented Sandayu from responding. Huh? Why aren't her films already available abroad? In general, other countries don't trust each other to not sneak propaganda into their films, Kurenai responded. Therefore, instead of spending time examining films for any subliminal messages or contradictory attitudes, it's much easier to simply stop them from crossing the border, she sighed, adding, of course, that just turns the whole thing into a black market, which makes the matter much more complex. So, aside from Hai no Kuni, Fujikaze-san has never appeared in a motion picture? Naruto inquired. That's correct, stated Sandayu. Might make our jobs easier then. Sasuke muttered, and Naruto was thinking the same thing. After all, things would be much simpler if no one recognized the client, but that raised the question of why so many shinobi were needed if the task was so straightforward. However, all three genin appeared to have been through a stampede, and their contemplation was interrupted when Team 8 and Kakashi returned. Yukie slung over Kakashi's back. What happened to you? Kurenai demanded, throwing a half-furious, half-exasperated glance at Kakashi, who shrugged unabashedly. Shino replied, giving a quick, concise run through of their chase of Yukie through the city they had made their way to, after receiving their mission. After she had managed to give them the run around for about 2 hours, Shino had managed to make contact with a Kakaichu he'd attached to her and they tracked her to a bar. Barring a few side comments courtesy of Kiba. Where did she even get a horse, anyway? Can this woman drink, by the triad? The explanation was completed quickly, and the three genin teams headed to the film studio with their sensei and clients. An hour later, all of the male genin were gathered in one room, getting ready for dinner. At Kakashi's insistence, they were going to dinner without weapons to appease the clients, but Sasuke was not going to be caught unprepared. He intended to ask Naruto to help him smuggle some weapons in with a sealing scroll. All right. What the heck? Kiba inquired, perplexed. Rolling his eyes, Shoji asked, how is she? Yukie Fujikaze. In human form. Was he fanboying? Oh my goodness, he was. It was disgusting. It seemed like a better idea to find out as much as they could from the client, and even though Kiba was a complete moron, he might have some useful intelligence. Sasuke rolled his eyes at the absurd conversation, tempted to ignore it. The Inuzuka scowled and sucked out an irritated breath, saying, she doesn't have the right to be such a bitch just because she's a babe. Naruto looked at Shino across from him and said, Shino? How did you feel about her? Fujikaze-san is notably antisocial, and has no care for her career or livelihood, the Aburame said after a brief period of silence during which she considered his response. She actually hates them. You might wonder why. Since. When Shino remained silent, Kiba continued, yeah, they get it, drawing a hand dismissively through the air. Basically, she doesn't want to be an actress, doesn't want to come to Yuki no Kuni, and Kakashi. Sensei had to abduct her to get her this far. Sasuke blinked. It sounded like really, Kakashi, of them to do that. Oh no, when Yukie woke up the morning after boarding the boat to Yuki no Kuni, it might be the understatement of the century to say she was unhappy. Thus, their first day on the ship headed for Yuki no Kuni was spent with an extremely unhappy actress who deliberately ruined her scenes and was generally incooperative out of sheer resentment, which naturally cost them all a lot of time and stress. On multiple occasions, the three Jonin believed they saw their genin's hands itch for weapons, intending to end their suffering in whatever manner was most practical. But the following day was more interesting. When Shikamaru wandered over to Naruto and Sasuke, who were conversing, the Raven pressing the blonde for information about his most recent night terror, he said, Kakashi, Sensei and Kurenai. Sensei want us topside to watch the shooting of Fujikaze. San's next scene. Please, moaned Naruto. I doubt I could handle it. You think I want to deal with that troublesome woman any more than you do? Shikamaru sighed. She's our client, anyway. Here, we don't really have many options. Along the way, the three genin encountered Kurenai, Sakura, Hinata, and Ino, and the six genin engaged in friendly conversation as they made their way to the ship's deck and stepped out onto the iceberg they were docked against. At the scene location, a small, frozen valley, the final 5 members of the Konoha contingent waited for the latecomers. They watched the film crew tinker with props and actor placement for the next half hour until they were finally ready to shoot. Hee. With a triumphant smirk, the villain said, So, Haim, princess, you've come, excellent work. Yukie and her company stars sat in what might have been a fighting stance with the right amount of squinting. It's you, Mao. Princess, please, stay ba. Remain calm. Even as the actors gave the young Kunoichi shady looks and the film crew muttering in disapproval, Ino yelled, her hands slipping into a handseal. Ino. What is it? Asuma asked, lowering himself and the other two Jonin into prepared positions and drawing their weapons. Before she could respond, the iceberg exploded, sending the cast and crew into a state of shock. The three more seasoned nin of the Konoha contingent all took positions farther forward, calling out to the crew to return, while the genin all ran and took positions behind Yukie, with Sakura, Naruto, and Naruto each placing a guiding arm on the actress to put her further away from the explosion. 3 shinobi, 2 men and a woman, had emerged in the valley. One wore the traditional costume of a Kirigakure shinobi, but his hide-8 was reminiscent of the hapuri style used by the Nidaime Hokage. He had long, light blue hair tied in a ponytail, pupil less teal eyes, and a slight marking beneath each eye that pointed sharply downwards. His eyebrows were full and expansive, and his face was pale and well defined, albeit a little gaunt. Well, hello, he replied. Welcome to Yuki no Kuni. The woman in the group, who was dressed in traditional Kirigakure shinobi clothing but had 2 holes on each side of her forehead protector that allowed pigtails to protrude from the top, said, I sincerely hope you still have the hex crystal. Her eyes were bright green, her hair was pink, and her face was round. So good to see you again, Koyuki. Hime, she said. With his eyes wide with realization, Kakashi turned back to face the actress and said, Koyuki? Hime? You're as good as the stories say, Hitaki, said the third shinobi, who appeared between the Konoha shinobi and the film crew, between them and the retreat. He had a brutish face and build, short purple hair, the same armor as his teammates, but it looked bulkier, dark eyes, and a hide-8 that was similar to the first male's except that it encircled his head. Unfortunately, it's probably not good enough for both you and your client. Not up to par? We are 4 times as many as you are, Kurenai inquired. Yuki.nin, you'd better give up now. Ino muttered in horror, we don't, and her fellows turned to face her. The blue-haired man said, smart girl, that one, and 9 more shinobi appeared out of the snow, none of whom had the same armor as the first 3. Hand over Koyuki and nobody has to die, he said. That is, aside from Koyuki. Our client, Kakashi interrupted, his voice quite overtly expressing his dislike for the notion. Naruto, Sakura, defend Koyuki. Do your best to deal with the ones without armor. The rest of you. Kurenai and Asuma each leapt for a different armored nin, but he didn't give them any orders. Kakashi said to his adversary, Roga Nader, as they crossed Kanai. Hitaki, the blue-haired man said, grinning, will you try not to flee this time? In response, Kakashi kicked the man in the head. Taking a position in front of Yukie, Naruto flicked a kunai into each hand. He corrected himself, Koyuki. Hime, which was strange enough because he was slightly aware of Sakura doing the same motion behind the princess. Trying to use his senses as much as possible, the young Uzumaki evaluated his surroundings, but since his ability was non-forthcoming at the time, the blonde was forced to evaluate the area visually. Enemy nin had positioned themselves in a triangle with one of the 3 armored nin at each point, making it impossible to get the princess cleanly through all of these people. 2 enemies were running at them from behind, towards the boat, and another was running directly at them, catching Shikamaru for a few seconds. He glanced at the terrified camera crew off to the side and thought, if they weren't careful, civilian casualties would also be high. Even as he watched, a stray kunai flew past them and struck the ground next to the crew, the explosive note attached sending a shockwave of fear through all the non-shinobi in the area. Koyuki shivered and fidgeted behind him. One of the 2 approaching nin dodged cleanly out of the way to the right, but the other was forced to leap upwards to avoid the attack. Sakura span on her heel and launched a hail of senbon and shuriken at the approaching shinobi, which they both avoided. Naruto then followed up with a barrage of his own, this time synchronized with the Pinkette's second barrage. The white-haired, middle-aged shinobi, Yuki.nin, tried to bring his sword about to deflect the attack, but the Kusari dodged around the blade and caught him in the stomach, slightly to the left at the point where his kidney would be found. Not a clean kill, but a near-certain one. Naruto jerked his wrist harshly, then let his Kongo Fusa dissipate, an agonized, wordless exclamation before the dull thump of dead flesh hitting the iceberg. Hyoken no Jutsu, ice sword technique, the woman called, and 2 blades of ice sprung from each forearm. The other shinobi, a green-haired kunoichi, slammed her palms to the ice and bellowed at the two genin. Naruto recognized this technique from Kushina's memories all too well. Naruto thought, "It's interesting. I've never seen the technique used like that before." With her two swords held in front of her as shields, Sakura sent a Kaden Hosenka no Jutsu at the green-haired Kunoichi, which was weakened by the heat and her own lack of affinity for the chakra nature. Naruto leapt at the woman with a kunai in the air, intending to kill, but she easily parried it with her own blades, barely scratched, let alone melted, and swung around with a slice and a kick to the left, grazing Naruto's right arm and sending him flying backwards. Sakura did her best to block the woman's attacks as she ran toward Koyuki, but the younger Kunoichi lacked the strength and dexterity to keep the woman at bay for very long. The princess, standing behind her Konoha.nin guard, held up a crystal that hung around her neck and gave it a light squeeze, which caused a bright light to emanate from it, blinding the older woman. Convenient, Naruto thought as he straightened up and used the brief distraction to throw his Kongo Fusa at the dodging Yuki.nin. If one of the other Yuki.nin has defeated their enemy, Naruto was greatly alarmed by the sudden addition of another Yuki.nin to the attack. Sakura glanced at him, subtly signing the beginning of a jutsu to her before he flicked his eyes to the boat, and she nodded before turning back to the two enemy shinobis standing across from them and their client. The Haruno girl used all of her chakra to unleash an empowered Kaden Gokakyu no Jutsu at the enemy nin, a technique Naruto enhanced with his own futon Shinkagyoku. As the powerful combination attack raced towards their enemies, Sakura grabbed Koyuki's hand and ran, racing between the disarrayed ranks of their distracted attackers and towards the boat. A hail of shuriken in front of the man managed to divert his thoughts and bring his focus back to Naruto, while the other managed to roll out of the line of fire and proceed to sprint after the escaping Kunoichi and her charge. The woman, one of their two attackers, attempted to deflect the attack once more and suffered some fairly severe burns as a result. Naruto sprang to his feet, his twin Kusari accompanying him as he attacked his enemies, the female of whom had resurfaced, only slightly battered, and wearing Yuki no Yoroi, ice armor, now poised to deliver a final blow. He sensed, not saw, that someone was being hit by his attack, and he moved quickly to attack them with the intention of eliminating the idiot. He discovered a pile of shredded ice where he had anticipated finding a fallen foe. There was nothingness after he felt something touch the back of his head. The multi-size technique, or Baika no Jutsu, Nikuden Sensha, human bullet tank, Shoji yelled, his body growing more round than usual as he tucked his limbs in before spinning. This time, he yelled and charged at one of their adversaries. Rather than being gratifying, the bump he rolled over and the crunch of bones beneath him made him feel sick. Shoji was stuck in spherical form, with even less control over his movement than he would have had standing on the ice, and suddenly the ice started to move beneath him, causing him to skid as he tried to leave the area. After he had mostly avoided the mobile ice, he released his jutsu and turned to see a man coming toward him. The black-haired man smirked and said, "Hey, interesting technique you have there, kid. Well, for a fat ass, anyway." The heir of Akamichi became enraged. The brunette launched himself at his opponent, who dodged cleanly and intoned his own jutsu, using a Baika no Jutsu and a Nikuden Sensha. Hyeten. Hakanai Ashiba, fleeting footing, ice release. When the Yuki.nin yelled, the ice started to move once more, but more forcefully, and as the man lowered his hands to the ground, spikes started to form, hitting so close to the Akamichi that he had to act quickly to avoid being impaled. After about a minute, the attacks ceased, and Shoji took a moment to rest before releasing his jutsu. "It seems like you're a bit of a one-trick pony," the man called in a mocking tone. Shoji grimaced. He was mainly out of his element here, as the thick ice prevented him from using his Doden ninjutsu, and he knew none that produced their own dirt, unlike some higher-level jutsu. As he started to build chakra for another Baika no Jutsu, the man threw him into taijutsu, flipping and turning with astonishing ease as he rained punches and kicks down on the brunette. Shoji tried to return the blows with interest, but it was clear that he was not doing very well. The man quickly pulled out a kunai, which the Akamichi heir, who was not a shuri kenjutsu expert and did not carry a bow staff like his father, met in turn, holding it awkwardly, but it was a fatal mistake to fight a man with a kunai without one in a taijutsu battle. For a while, they continued to trade blows, but it was clear that the man was playing with the Akamichi. Shoji searched frantically for someone nearby who could assist him, finally looking at Sasuke and Ino, who was pinned down by a shinobi some 15 meters away. He looked at the final Uchiha as well, who seemed to be overcoming his opponent rather easily and wasn't being restrained, but the Raven disregarded his frantic comrade, and Choji paid the price right away. The man's kunai cut upward across his face, causing excruciating pain that radiated from the strike. As the Akamichi staggered back, clutching his face and wailing, he felt a punch connect with his gut, followed by a kick to his already injured face, sending him flying for a few moments. When he hit the ground, it was with a weak groan of pain that was swept away by blissful darkness, rather than a skid. Ino's scream was the last thing he heard. Despite hearing Ino scream, Sasuke chose to ignore it and concentrate on the enemy across from him. Sasuke was drawn to the adrenaline rush and the sense of life, or death that came with being in a real battle. He wondered what it would be like to kill Itachi in the biggest battle of his life and how his blood would boil at the sight of that man. The idea made him smile, which startled his opponent. The Yuki.Nin threw a lot of senbon at him, too many for Sasuke to follow with his Sharingan, so he Shunshin, body flicker, Ed out of the way, trying to hit his opponent's back, but they spun and blocked his blow with a kunai. He would admit that he was intrigued by the Shunshin. Most people would assume that the jutsu had something to do with teleportation, but in fact, it had something to do with incredibly fast movement. The jutsu was not a single act, like the Yondaime's Hiraishin, Flying Thunder God, but rather a series of actions that were all related to chakra. The first was the release of chakra in a wave to confuse any nearby targets and impair their ability to sense chakra in a local area. Immediately after that, a single, basic smoke bomb would be dropped to block any attacker's vision. Then, the user would increase chakra flow to their limbs to allow for incredibly fast movement. The only risks were overuse, as the movement required a constant, significant increase in chakra flow, and the risk of bodily harm if the chakra flow wasn't carefully managed. Take off. Take as many as you can, the enemy leader, still engaged in combat with Kakashi, yelled. What was meant by that? Suddenly, the Yuki.Nin across from him took something out of their pocket. It was a metal object that Sasuke instinctively knew he couldn't let touch him. Sasuke ducked down, flung himself to the right in a roll, and then, in a single fluid motion, he stood, pulling a kunai and throwing it at the enemy nin. The man threw it at him, and Sasuke dodged cleanly, only realizing the threat at the last second. A chakra string attached to the object brought it back around in an arc for the Uchiha's back. The elder shinobi managed to balance his efforts between using a kunai and directing his chakra strings fairly well, but not enough to keep the Uchiha to close combat. The man raised a kunai in one hand to deflect the projectiles, stalling the genin's attack and continuing his assault at the same time. Making the hand signals required for his technique, Sasuke backflipped cleanly out of his opponent's path. Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu. The man had no chance as the Raven yelled, his attack hammering down on his adversary and the offending metal object with such strength. The young Uchiha felt uneasy as he stood triumphant over the smoldering body of his defeated opponent. Something's wrong, he thought, something was off, something had gone terribly wrong. However, a moment later, Sasuke realized exactly what was wrong, and his chest began to tighten with fear. Some of the genin were missing, including Ino, Shikamaru, and Naruto. They had Naruto, the Yuki.Nin. After being knocked out by the Yuki Nin's attack, Naruto had a memory from Kushina's point of view. As she cut her way across the battlefield, Kushina's blood stained and reddened Kiri's beaches. Although there were Kiri.Nin everywhere, she was Uzumaki and her Konoha forces were powerful and well trained. Two Kunoichi tried to hit her side, but she decapitated them cleanly in a shower of blood as she swept her katana to the right in a clean arc. The ox-headed demon, Yushioni, splattered across her white Enbu mask. The redhead summoned one of her Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, and used it to impale two more shinobi while using the blunt length of the chain to knock another one away. However, she sensed it before she could plunge deeper into the conflict, deeper into the gore and bloodlust. The sensation of impending frost, a prickling sensation in the air, and her breath becoming hazy as it left her lungs. The image of a man landing on the coastal water, despite the water freezing at his feet. She felt as though the menacing, oppressive chakra was choking her. Shinobi from both Kiri and Konoha collapsed around her, some even fainting or, for those who were already near death, dying. Kushina didn't. Kushina lifted her gaze to meet his, gazing at Yuki Aida with the deepest resentment. The Sandame Mizukage was a man in his mid-60s with dark gray hair, squinted black eyes, and noticeable wrinkles and frown lines around his mouth. His hair was evenly woven with tiny, light blue beads that resembled a stylized crown. The man was wearing his hat and cage robe, but even as she watched, he grabbed his robes with his regular hand and tore them off, exposing a long, sleeved blue shirt and long black pants. In the plate, style of the Warring Clans era, he wore armor over it. Aida then used his right ice crafted hand, his other hand, to point at her. Uzumaki. Some call you a demoness on the field of battle. My men certainly fear you. But I see, now. You're just as weak as the rest of your clan. Hey. Remain calm. You act as if you defeated my grandfather, Uzumaki Tsutomu, by yourself. But we both know you needed a hand with that, Kushina said, with a menacing smile, but that's what he wants. It was bold. It was, of course. Nevertheless, she did it. Battles between strong shinobi frequently started with a verbal sparring match, a sign of bravado. And the man was this. Tsutomu. Gigi was killed by this man. The Nidame Raikage and the man who spearheaded the attack on Uzushio. The individual who sparked the uprising among the dispersed Hizuka clan members who were Uzushiogakure shinobi. In order to ruin her village, friends, and family, the man who had the barrier removed did so. The man who destroyed Uzu no Kuni, also known as the Land of Whirlpools, and Uzushiogakure, its secret village. The man who planned thousands of people's deaths. Kushina would see to it that he was held accountable. The glare he gave her a great deal of satisfaction, but the best part was the ice covering the stump where his right hand had been. According to war survivors, Tsutomu, Gigi, the final leader of Uzushiogakure, Uzu no Kuni, and the Uzumaki clan, had cut off the Sandame's hand and the Raikage's head in one blow. Soon after, Aida had killed the man, but the damage was already done. Kushina's reflection was cut short by Aida's thunderous scoff, which was a shock to the face. As he announced his jutsu, the Mizukage made quick hand gestures, water gushing from the ocean, his voice ringing with strength. Words are the weapons of the weak. Come. We will see if you are as strong as your grandfather. Hyodin. Mikio Hyosho, ice release, demonic mirroring ice crystals. The two shinobi were surrounded by a huge dome of mirrors, but Kushina was not the type to be easily fooled. Even as the Yuki stepped into a kusari, she directed her Kaden. Natured chakra through it, sending it hurtling toward one of the surfaces. The mirror shattered, but it held its shape. The ice melted back into a solid surface, and the pieces came together to form a single solid pane. Aida's image came back into focus and was now visible in all of the dome's mirrors. TCH, she thought as she sent another chain infused with Kaden in the direction of another surface. The Uzumaki nearly grinned as the same procedure was repeated. It must be a combination of elemental manipulation in Jikukan Ninjutsu, space. Time technique, he can concentrate on 1, 2, or 3 of these mirrors simultaneously. If I smash more of them, though? 3 ice spears were hurled at her from one mirror. No, from each of the mirrors, as the man threw another jutsu at her. After giving her options a brief thought, the redhead's gambit was to take a seal out of her pocket and slam it to the ground. All of this was completed in a flash, and the Kunoichi's greatest defense against the Mizukage's attack was her speed. I didn't want to use a trump card so fast, she thought. It's very volatile and experimental. In addition, I only have one. Her own invention, her ultimate technique. A dome of red as rich and deep as her hair illuminated the inside of the ice formation, shielding her from Aida's attack. The Fuinjutsu. Dokutate, sealing technique. Absorption shield, glowed brightly. The stolen power of his chakra caused her own reserves to momentarily expand and stretch. Despite the technique's breakdown and the paper it was written on turning to smoke and ash, the Uzumaki were unfazed. Kushina sent a dozen Kongo Fusa flying in the direction of the Yuki, who ducked to a window that was not their target. However, she had hurled them all in the same direction, and she briefly broke through them using the power of the man's own chakra. She had launched the 12th and last Kusari behind the others, and she used it to pull herself through the narrowing gap while he was already reforming the mirrors. But before she could enter and exit, it closed, and the Uzumaki had to stop herself on the mirror that she was moving toward due to inertia, which broke the chain. With a curse, she fell to the ice feet first and bounced back into the middle of the makeshift arena. The man threw hundreds of ice-based senbon at her, a volley that was impossible to avoid in this small area. Kushina summoned her Kusari, gave them Kaden chakra, raised them around her in a barrier, and instantly spanked. As they collided with her defense, the senbon all melted to water and then to steam as her pace increased and she spun faster and faster. For what felt like hours, their battle followed this pattern. Evading, hitting, parrying, and retaliating. The floor was covered in kanai and ice. Senbon, and Kushina was always moving around the dome out of fear of the Mizukage's retaliation. Abruptly, Aida appeared before her, already on her guard, thrusting a spear of ice into her heart. Quickly ducking, Kushina turned on one foot and spun, slicing the man cleanly in two. But her assailant's figure swiftly shifted to water, which froze and dropped to the ground. A Mizu Bunshin. Water clone. Then, Kushina summoned her Kusari and started to spin after another volley of Senbon hit her. She was immobile. The redhead could only twirl her chains in patterns around her body in an attempt to deflect the man's attacks as she stared down at her feet in shock, frozen to the ground beneath her, probably due to the water the destroyed Bunshin exploded into. As she did so, Kushina channeled Kaden Chakra through her legs, causing an unusual burn that was both unfamiliar and melting the ice that had formed around them. Not all of the Senbon could be stopped by her. As she gasped, the Uzumaki collapsed to her knees on the icy beach, blood leaking from wounds on her left shoulder and right thigh. While the left hand held her leg wound, the right held her blade loosely. "Skilled," muttered the man. The Mizukage's eyes were like frozen steel, rolling over and through her like the tide. "Very skilled. Konoha no Kusari. Taikiyatsu, chain cyclone of the leaf. I shall name you. But all cyclones eventually fade to but a slight wind and scattered rain. Uzumaki. You are strong, yes, but not as powerful as your grandfather. Tsutomu. Dono wielded that blade with far greater skill than you, and had he possessed your Kekkei Genkei, I would be long dead to this world. Instead, Aida laughed, I am the one stood here, about to extinct a great clan forevermore." After what he had done, Kushina was about to respond, how dare he, how dare this man even utter Tsutomu Gigi's name, but was sidetracked by a sudden blur of movement. The Mizukage barely avoided certain death at the hands of the Sanin's Orochimaru by dodging to the right into one of his mirrors with just a second remaining. The Namami hissed, well, in a voice full of hate. The man looked at Kushina and she gave him a weary smile. "Look what we have here." A little mouse ventured out of its hole. "I'd have thought you capable of skewering a rodent like this, Kushina-kun." The redhead rolled her eyes and shook her head, but her smile remained fixed on her face. Some vermin have sharp teeth. Even as the Mizukage fell from another mirror and landed squarely in front of the two Konoha Anbu, Orochimaru said, "Well then," sticking out his tongue to lick his lips. "Perhaps this mouse needs a reminder of how dangerous it is to challenge a snake." Then, in a gruesome dance on a bloody battlefield, they went to war. The sound of hissing filled the night, the rattle of chains hitting ice rang in their ears, and the chill of frost sent shivers down their spines. The dance progressed from stage to stage, quickly reaching its conclusion with every wrist flick, sideways movement, and blade slice. She screamed in anger as she charged at him, the coiled snake next to her stretching to strike. She twisted and turned, she dodged and ducked, that man and that demon laughed maliciously, her blade twisted in her hand, and she heard what she thought was her own yelp of pain. Startled, the Uzumaki took a step back, feeling a kunai of ice stick out of her stomach. The Yuki manipulated the ice in her left hand, causing it to form and spike outward in all directions, piercing her limb with hundreds of thin points as she swiftly and harshly pulled it out. As she cursed, she directed her hands pure Kaden. Natured chakra, turning the ice into water and the water into steam. The redhead stopped when she felt burns starting to appear on her skin, but it was worth it to stop the man from carrying such a valuable weapon. Since her left hand was damaged, Kushina used only her right to quickly bandage the wound on her torso. Damn it, she thought, glaring at her opponent, who was preoccupied with Orochimaru. That was his desire. Crime my kenjutsu offense. The Uzumaki primarily wielded her katana with both hands because that was how it was intended to be used. Even though she could use it with one hand, her blows would be much less powerful. Not to mention I can't use elemental ninjutsu one-handed, Kushina said, but her weapons were the only real way she used her Kaden chakra. She had been repeatedly accused of having a very strange style of ninjutsu. The Mizukage was dodging Orochimaru's Seneashu, hidden shadow snake hands. When the Uzumaki leapt to her feet again and threw herself at him, she twisted and kicked at his head, which he then dodged. Aida ducked and gave Kushina a nasty kick to the chest as she curved her katana around to curve at her back. Before skidding across the beach, Kushina was launched for meters into the air. Even though she saw her blade lying abandoned in the distance, Orochimaru picked it up and rounded on Aida with a vicious snarl on his lips. While watching the two fight, the Uzumaki struggled to her feet and nursed her broken ribs. Aida summoned another ice spear and deflected Orochimaru's blows with it. However, the Sanin was soft-footed and always on the lookout for a chance. As the older Konoha Nin slipped past the Mizukage's guard and sliced downward, Kushina nearly missed it and spat up a thick, viscous glob of blood. Conversely, oh, how appropriate. She laughed and fell to the ground, covered in blood. Grasping his wrist, the Sandaime Mizukage covered the wound with ice. A shield of ice that materialized in front of the man prevented Orochimaru from carrying out his immediate attempt at a second beheading. The Mizukage leveled them with a stern gaze after waving an arm. He acknowledged, "You have outperformed me," but he started making one-handed hand seals with his other hand. The ice formed one right away. "You're not telling the truth." With a curse, she hurried forward, thinking. Strong, powerful, and full of murderous intent. Chakra gathered, and Kushina knew she would require Orochimaru's support to accomplish this. The Yuki called, Hayatan. Sabama Fubuki, ice release. Swallow snowstorm, as ice birds formed from the mirrors and flew. As the mirrors broke apart and the ice rose from the ground, thousands of the creatures began to form. Both sides shinobi paused and gazed, enthralled with the deadly swarm of animals. Orochimaru hissed and slammed a palm to the ground, saying, Kachiyose. Rashomon. Summoning. Rashomon. In front of them, a massive, horned gate with a demonic face appeared as an unexpected, unwavering defense. Without any delay, Kushina slammed a palm against the ground, sending her Kongo Fusa through the earth and making a calculated loop back up to the surface, where it struck the Rashomon's edges. Kongo Fusa. Kekai, adamantine sealing chains. Barrier, she yelled. Just in time to prevent any of the icebergs from passing, Chakra leapt between the chains. The attack continued for 2 complete minutes, with ice swallows attacking one after another, until even Kushina's enormous chakra reserves started to run low. As the gate sank into the earth, the redhead let her barrier drop and turned back to the Mizukage, panting. Only the slightest tightening of the wrinkles around his eyes revealed the man's own weariness as he stood 10 meters away, frowning. His voice was as icy as the surrounding air as he said, I see there is no point continuing on from here. The man ran straight into an ice mirror as he turned and ran away. He still held Orochimaru's blade, which she extended, sending its vile edge flying through the darkness. The Sandaime Mizukage was already gone when it pierced the mirror, but not the man. At the sign of his flight, his troops turned and fled into the dense fog, heading for Yusuga Pass, the narrow valley that served as the only way to enter this cove from the rest of Mizu no Kuni, or the Land of Water. Knowing that the Kiri.Nin would defeat them in a battle in the mist, especially with their own shinobi so exhausted, the Sani next to her turned and told the other Konoha.Nin not to follow. It's best to avoid pushing their luck. Kushina gave a nasty smile. It was possible to establish a beachhead on the shores of Mizu no Kuni after Kirigakure was routed. They could now confront the adversary. The Uzumaki gazed at Orochimaru, who was fascinated studying her blade. He smirked and returned the fabled blade to her, turning at the sense of being watched. That's a nice blade, Kushina-kun. I don't suppose you could lend it to me at some point, for study? Kushina smiled a little and rolled her eyes. It's a family heirloom, Orochimaru. Shouldn't you just be glad that you got to use the legendary Kusanagi no Tsurugi, if only for a moment? Hinata said softly. Choji-kun, without the stutter that usually accompanies her voice. Please move your hand away. The remnants of the 3 teams worked in a daze in the hour after the catastrophic assault on the iceberg, moving the dead and mechanically tending to the injured. The rest of the genin had fallen into a sullen silence as the gravity of their predicament set in. The cold mortality of shinobi life became much more real when Shikamaru, Ino, and Naruto went missing. The boy cradled his face and mumbled, I don't want to, with his eyes screwed shut. After their attackers had fled, he had woken up rather quickly, and because the attack was so overwhelming, they hadn't reached Choji in time to prevent him from closing up like this. Once he learned that 2 teammates and a friend were missing, his condition only worsened. Hinata repeated, Choji-kun, her voice becoming pleading. But that didn't make the steel edge beneath it any less real. You must show me what your injury is. Any cosmetic damage can be fixed. The rotund boy shivered, plucked up the courage, and took his hand off his eye before she had even finished. There was serious damage. The eye was a bright mess of dried blood and ruined tissue, neatly split down the middle. On the left side of the young boy's face, a deep cut sliced through his left cheek and jawline, starting above his eyebrow. Hinata gasped in horror and stared at him, but he responded with a rough whisper, that bad, huh? She gave a silent nod in response, describing the extent of the facial gash. He flinched. There goes my career as a shinobi. Hinata gave a firm shake of her head. No, she insisted. No, not at all. Choji-kun. For the Hyuga, eye damage was an awful, agonizing experience. I've seen shinobi with much worse damage, even within my own clan. particularly when they were using their dojutsu. The experience had been known to drive some people insane, including Hinata's mother. The heir of Akamichi stumbled around her counter-argument, but, I'm wounded. I'm blind in one eye. I'll never be a successful leader of my clan now. He stopped talking and just blinked in awe when Hinata gave him a smile that was so full of understanding. That why? You're an S.Sc. Screw. You. Up. B but why? You're not? Hinata softly and slowly said, I know what it's like to feel like you're never going to amount to anything. Her voice shook and trembled with a stutter, her vehemence slurring her speech to almost unintelligible levels. You're AG. Good shish. Shinobi and AG. Good friend. If that's true of me, why isn't it true of you? He asked quietly as he looked at her in shock. Hinata was unable to respond to that. From the boat, Kakashi observed Asuma approaching Choji and Hinata. From the hard pat he gave Choji's shoulder, it was clear that the boy had been seriously injured, even though the copy.nin could not tell the status of the two genin at this distance without using his Sharingan. In spite of his observation, the Sarutobi pulled the two genin to their feet and led them back to the boat, where the film crew and the other Konoha.nin were waiting. Kurenai was standing beside him with her hands on her hips when the Hitaki turned to study another shinobi in vague terms. The red-eyed woman sighed, huffed, and raised one quizzical gray eyebrow in question. Kakashi, there's nothing you could have done. It was a meaningless platitude. Predictable. Without foundation. Wrong, his brain muttered. One more dead. Another Obito, another Rin, another Minato. Sensei, or another Kushina-san. He had insisted that he wasn't fit to teach, but the Hokage had still placed another life in Hitaki Kakashi's care. His hands were bloody. Instead, he insisted, Ma, I know that, Kurenai. Chan, and even as the woman growled, his expression remained unchanged. She extended her hand and took several of his Jonin flak jackets. Damn it Hitaki. She cried in rage on the spot. They're not dead yet, we can still go and save them. Kakashi grinned as cold cynicism struck him like a wave. His voice was grim as he spoke, and so was his expression. Even against his own wishes and his own fear of hypocrisy, the logistical nightmare struck him once more. Kurenai, our team is 3 down, 4, if we include Shoji, who we can't be sure about yet. It's a miracle that nobody actually died. And how are we going to infiltrate Kirigakure and rescue our team with 5 genin? It's true that people who disobey the rules are scum. However, those who desert their allies are said to be doing so because it would be suicide. Did that stop the Konoha no Shiroi Kiba, White Fang of the Leaf? Kakashi gave a slap. Like jerk. What? He realized Kurenai was still talking, and he could tell by the intensity of her voice. Hitaki Tsukumo was a hero who refused to abandon his comrades, even in the face of terrible odds, in order to save them the experience of pain and torture endured by Kirigakure shinobi. When he spoke, Kakashi's voice had somewhat recovered its usual cheer, but his face had lost color, a familiar conversation still reverberating in his mind. With a hint of humor, the silver-haired man remarked, and if you don't remember, Kurenai. Chan, his failure instigated the Third War. Yes. With a hint of amusement, Kakashi observed that the red-eyed Jonin made a strange shooing motion with one hand, as though dismissing the countless thousands of war casualties as unimportant. Senju Kunio would not have survived to defeat Kirigakure no Hyson of the Hidden Waterfall, and without his death, Konoha might not be standing today. However, the war would have begun eventually anyhow, and Hyuga Hizashi would have died years before the Hyuga incident if the Shiroi Kiba hadn't saved his teammates. Kurenai tapped the boat's deck with her foot and said, and let's not forget, adding thoughtfully, that we have the only remaining heir to the Kazuhana family with us right now. If we are successful in our offensive, we could topple Dodo and install Koyuki, thus averting a war. Kakashi's left eyebrow raised, the only visible indication of his extreme skepticism. And how would you suggest we do that? We have the numbers. Kurenai, genin, and we've already lost 4. I should be able to aid with reinforcements, Shinobi.san, said a second, more polished voice that was thickly reinforced with steely determination. Kakashi recognized it as Sandayu, Koyuki's assistant, dressed in the armor of a Yuki no Kuni, Land of Snow, court samurai, who serve as the daimyo's guards. 1. It has been many years since Yuki no Kuni fell under Dodo's tyranny, the older gentleman continued. It is time she is set right again. You brought me 3 genin after I asked for my niece and the hex crystal. Why? The Kazuhana male had long brown hair, violet eyes, and a formidable face with distinct features, including prominent tear troughs. He was heavily muscular, but he still wore the traditional clothing of Yuki no Kuni's daimyo. Dodo asked, unconcerned. Roga Nader nodded in reply. Yes, sir. As seen in this video, the girl is Fujikaze Yukie, and she possesses the crystal, Nader said, sweeping a hand to cover the large viewing screen that occupied a wall of the tiny throne room they were seated in. With an expression of sincere apologies, the team's female member, Kakoyoku Fubuki, deepened her bow and said, Daimyo Sama, our Chunin teams were not as capable as we believed. They were easily defeated in the absence of Chakra armor's strength. We were forced to take as many hostages as possible. Looking at the picture of Fujikaze Yukie on the screen, Dodo said absently, I would know that face anywhere. She looks a lot like my late brother. Considering that she is in charge of the crystal and appears hesitant to come here. I believe we've found our girl. My lord, what would you like us to do? Behind Dodo's throne to the left, the second, more savage man asked. I guess you haven't done too badly, Dodo grinned. Konoha will attempt to mount a rescue after their genin is captured. Strengthen the perimeter guards' ranks and get them ready for an assault. Nader is going to stay here. After saying, Fubuki and Mizor will attack this film crew and capture Koyuki, he burst out laughing, a menacing sound reverberating throughout the dimly lit room. Konoha has many bloodline shinobi. Maybe I could persuade a few of them to swear allegiance to me. Have our shinobi capture these foreign invaders. Dodo waved a dismissive hand in response to the three shinobis' nods. He thought, the treasure will be mine soon. His chakra pathways ached, frozen and lifeless in a way they never should be. But could be, he thought, with a flicker of remembrance. And even as he felt around for his connection to the energy, his search came up empty. Grasping desperate hands reached for any source of chakra he could wield, any source of the elusive energy. And Naruto woke up, restless, and a few moments later, wide awake. Located. Nobody around, he thought, and with the smallest of thoughts, a spark of the corrosive chakra spread forth from the seal, frying the item and making it useless. The device was destroyed with a spark, a crackle, and a smarting pain where it once sat Kyuubi. The Biju was there, waiting, watching, its chakra just a hair's breadth from the surface. With a roguish smile, Naruto thought, they didn't plan to deal with me. I wonder if they grabbed anybody else. The blonde Uzumaki was free to roam the halls after a simple Nawanuke no Jutsu, rope escape technique, freed him from the physical bonds that were preventing him from escaping. His first attempt to leave the cell was, admittedly painful, but a breeze of futon chakra to oppose the electricity surrounding his body was enough to protect him, though it was an absolute nightmare to maintain. He emerged from his cell, recognizing that he was in a small prison complex carved out of ice, with smaller cells lining the opposing walls on multiple levels. Naruto's own cell was on the bottom level, roughly in the center of one wall, and he suspected that any of the other genin were in cells far from his own. Even as he watched a patrol move from one entrance to another, Naruto saw bridges of ice spanning the vast expanse. He kept avoiding the patrols and searching the nearby cells for enemy.nin, smiling when his sensory abilities held for a brief moment. After 10 minutes of travel, Naruto found himself outside a prison cell where Shikamaru lay unconscious. Another 10 minutes later, he discovered two genin gently waking Ino in her own cell, and after another 15 minutes of searching, they decided that the three of them were the only genin captured. Most of the cells were empty of prisoners, with a few holding gaunt, half-dead civilians bound in ropes. On multiple occasions, Naruto passed a body lying motionless in a cell, never to rise again. According to Ino, those jutsu they were using, is that an elemental Kekkei Genkai? Shikamaru appeared about to concur, but Naruto shook his head and said, no, it wasn't. As the other two were about to bring him back to reality, he shook his head and went on, saying, Hyeten, like all elemental Kekkei Genkai, revolves around creating the sub-element by combining two of the standard natures. I've seen Hyeten, ice release, techniques before. His eyes went glassy for a few moments, caught again in the memory of Aida. They only used ice that had already formed. Could it be that the same Kekkei Genkai is being manipulated in a different way? Shikamaru inquired. No, the elemental bloodline's standard rule wouldn't be broken just for these guys, Naruto said, shaking his head. Besides, they don't share a single appearance. Given that they have been largely eradicated, I doubt that they are all members of the Yuki clan. So what? How's it going for them? Ino asked. There are some examples, rare though they may be, of shinobi from a clan being unable to use their Kekkei Genkai, yet still using something similar, Shikamaru said thoughtfully after a moment of contemplative silence. It varies between clans, but the basics is that they've developed a watered-down version of the skill that can be taught, without the necessary genetic ability. Some say that's how the techniques of the Ino Shika show came to be. But regardless, the heir to the Nara added, this puts us at an advantage. If they truly are only using extant ice, which would fit with my own experience again the Yuki.nin, then we have a weakness to their abilities. We can prevent them from gaining access to the formed ice. Here, he examined their jail cell, and keep them on their toes. The Yamanaka slowly pointed out, Shika, don't know if you've noticed this, but this entire building is ice. Kinda hard to keep them away from it. Ino and Naruto exchanged a suspicious look. In defiance, the brunette shook his head. Actually, I think they need physical contact, tempered by intense mental concentration, to make their jutsu work. Think about it. Did either of you see them pull ice up without physically placing their hands on the iceberg? He continued after their dismissive responses. So, don't give them an opportunity to physically manipulate the ice, and we're fine. The two other genin gave a nod. Ino said, what can we do, then? We've no idea how to escape. The heir of Nara sighed. It's troublesome, but we're technically still on the job, he stated. This is an A-rank mission, supposedly, and since they hired shinobi, and 3 teams of shinobi at that, it's obvious that they knew that this was going to happen. Naruto exclaimed, this is the job we were hired for, as consciousness began to dawn. Shikamaru nodded as the Yamanaka's eyes widened beside him. And now, we're in the middle of the hornet's nest. The Nara nodded, but his fellow blonde cocked her head in perplexity. My thoughts exactly. We were hired to protect Fujikaze Yukie. Or, as those Yuki.nin called her, Koyuki. Heim. And we can do that best by eliminating the threat, here, while we have the chance. Wait, Ino said without warning. Koyuki. Heim. As in, literally a princess. If she's in danger here, then we can assume it's because she's from a foreign or deposed government. Meaning her enemy is the current daimyo. Shikamaru paused, then nodded. It would explain why she was so set against coming here. From what little I know of Yuki no Kuni, its current leader deposed the last in a successful assassination and coup d'etat. Koyuki must be a relation of that previous leader, likely their daughter or granddaughter. Airily, Ino waved the brunette away. Yeah, but the real issue is, to protect her, we're going to have to depose the threat. That is, a daimyo. And we all know what happens when you do that. The other two paused. If we depose them, though, Naruto continued, then Koyuki could take their place. And it'd make the reformed Yukigakure indebted to Konoha. That is, if she wants it, Shikamaru reflected deliberately. I mean, if she doesn't, where would that leave us? That's her problem, the heiress from Yamanaka said glibly. We're shinobi, and we've been hired to do a job. So, how we going to do this? Naruto gave a cheeky smile. He tapped a finger to Ino's temple and looked him in the eyes, saying, I have an idea. She smiled after a moment. Shikamaru let out a moan at the two ignorant blondes. Troublesome. They then began plotting. Before moving, the 3 genin squatted outside the daimyo's chamber entrance and took a quick look around the space. On a raised platform in front of the daimyo's throne were a number of shinobi. 7, to be precise. Their situation was both simplified and complicated by the fact that none of the shinobi were familiar from the iceberg attack. The brunette started using his Kage no Jutsu, Shadow Possession Jutsu, after the group's only female singled out one of the enemy nin. Naruto sprinted into the enemy after Shikamaru and Ino nodded. He sprang into the air and jumped over the whole enemy force, which the Kage momentarily rendered inoperable. Even as Naruto called forth his Kongo Fusa to attack the daimyo, Ino positioned her hands in her signature jutsu position and readied her attack. Instinctively, a wall of ice erupted from the floor to shield the Yuki no Kuni leader as the man spun to meet the Uzumaki's attack. Damn it. He is skilled in the shinobi arts. Naruto threw a chain into a distant wall and swung across the room with it. His momentum carried him to the ice wall, where he caught himself and launched himself back at his opponent with a burst of chakra. A dozen spears of ice were hurled at the lone Konoha genin as Dodo lowered his fist to the ground. The genin threw himself low and sideways, hooking a kusari length at the man's feet and swinging around him to try to trap him. The daimyo changed his feet and a thick layer of ice formed around his legs, enclosing but protecting them nonetheless, rather than dodging as Naruto had hoped. After using the kusari for a long time, it dissipated, and Naruto let out a curse. They stood motionless for a moment, facing one another, but that was all that was required. Ino screamed and hit, and Naruto gave himself the smallest of smirks. A pull, a twist, a strange wrenching sensation, the sense of her body falling, dead. However, she witnessed a sight rather than a sensation. Turning, twisting, fighting. As most people do instinctively, the mind struggled, but she was Yamanaka, a kunoichi, and her teammates relied on her. She filled the native consciousness with her presence and sat on top of it, squashing it. Kazuhana Dodo's mind went silent as she made one last feeble attempt to shake off her jutsu, at least temporarily. Ino grinned. It was a strange mouth that turned up in reply. It had been an easy plan. While Naruto went after the daimyo and his primary guards, Shikamaru would divert as many of the Yuki.nin as he could. Although they hadn't anticipated that the man would be able to defend himself, it gave Ino more time to practice her jutsu in the doorway's shadow. The weakest Yuki.nin, as determined by Ino, was then instructed by Shikamaru to locate the Yamanaka, and he pretended to momentarily lose control of his jutsu. Even as her own body crumpled and, unintentionally, avoided a thrown kunai, the woman had spun and struck, and with precise timing, Ino had flickered, shifted, and entered the enemy leader's mind. The kunoichi of Kirigakure would believe she had passed out from terror. Then, in an attempt to distract him with her scream, Naruto sprang forward, and Ino. Dodo charged forward, hitting him on the back of the head, leaving the Uzumaki unconscious and sprawled. Her sympathetic wince was completely internal and did not break the daimyo's expression of icy malice. She also delved deeper into the man's mind, looking for information she could relay to the Hokage, even as she gave the order for the Yuki.nin to carry the 3 prone genin back to their cells. In a way only the Yamanaka had ever been able to do, Ino bounded through mental barrier after mental barrier, shifting through feelings and fossicking through thoughts. More out of curiosity than anything else, she first sought the truth about the Hyoden the Yuki.nin used. She found it after just a few moments of searching. As she combed through the information, she thought bitterly, it seems that Yuki no Kuni's scientists do not limit their studies to technological advancement. Since no bloodline clans participated in the village's founding, Kirigakure had long been involved in the acquisition of Kekkei Genkei. A Yuki in Yuki no Kuni was Dodo's justification for sending some of his shinobi to Mizu no Kuni, Land of Water, in order to retrieve a Yuki clan member. But the kunoichi they discovered couldn't use the clan's Kekkei Genkei. Although Yuki no Kuni's scientists created a treatment to enable Yuki.nin to have the chakra and blood of Yuki, which the woman still had, they were unable to activate the dormant Hyoden gene. They asked the inmate how they could make it work. As Shikamaru had stated, Dodo knew that some shinobi could use Kekkei Genkei without having the required affinity. The member of the Yuki clan knew a path. They found a scroll of techniques that those Yuki clan members who were unable to use the Hyoden could use before she passed away from the torture. 2. With a sigh, Ino continued to explore the memories, hoping to learn more about Dodo's role as daimyo. After all, she acknowledged, this is going to go really badly if we're wrong. Oh. Thus, Koyuki's father, the former daimyo, had been overthrown by the man. Due to Dodo's schemes, the man's own brother was burned inside his house. They were right to suspect it. Additionally, oh God, Ino thought, evaluating the facts in front of her with astonishment, this was. The Sandame needed to know. Jiraiya frowned as he and his sensei walked into the Ikanban meeting room. Here, I don't feel anything is wrong. Additionally, we arrive last. What the heck? What was the root of the issues? What were they doing, and how did it affect only the Shinobi no Kami and the Shinobi no Kami, God of Shinobi? It didn't make sense. Even after working with Sarutobi and Tsunade for weeks on end, Jiraiya was unable to explain the Hokage's strange dissonance between action and cognition. More possible instances surfaced daily, including meetings, instances where Hiruzen's judgment appeared to be flawed, but nothing particularly dramatic. In a game that was intended to totally upend Konohagakure no Sato's upper echelons, their unidentified adversary took calculated, cautious risks. He whispered, "You don't think it has something to do with the guards? They were probably the most evasive and unobserved of all the individuals present. There are 5 guards in the room, all of whom are concealed by light genjutsu." Though he wasn't sure where he had seen it previously, Jiraiya thought he vaguely recognized one of them. Sarutobi scowled but gave a slow shake of his head. "No, I trust those 4 implicitly." Jiraiya tensed up. He is unaware that there is. Exclamations reverberated as the guards fell to the ground as a smoke bomb immediately fell in the middle of the room. With the exception of one, which Jiraiya was able to follow through the ceiling's shadows and toward the doorway only by instinct, they were also traveling quickly. As the enemy used a Shunshin no Jutsu, body flicker technique, the Sannin fled for the doorway without even stopping, undermining the Toad Sage's limited ability to sense chakras intuitively. A quick burst of speed, but the fake Anbu was quicker, and the Hokage was right behind Jiraiya as he spun with a kick. Even as the original slipped between their fingers and vanished into the wider hall, which contained too many potential entry and exit points to possibly track the escaping shinobi, a Cage Bunshin caught the technique square in the face and it exploded into more smoke and chakra. Jiraiya was aware that they would fail even if he called forth a toad to aid in tracking, and the Anbu teams Hyuga and Inuzuka worked together to find the attacker. Among the Ikenban, one was aware. One of them, at least. If they hadn't, this wouldn't have been overlooked for so long. This could not possibly have started with the whole Ikenban unawares. Furthermore, the foe, Anbu, would no longer be foolish enough to come back. In other words, this was probably the last time the attacker attended a Ikenban meeting. Additionally, they had escaped his grasp. Oh no. Jiraiya swore. In order to find a way to sneak up on the battlements, Kakashi knelt down. The entire village was covered in ice, with only a dark shadow visible behind the frozen exterior, unaffected by the dark bricks of the walls. The village was surrounded by a wall made entirely of ice, with guard posts on top. Standing atop the battlements, more than 36 Yuki.Nin pointed strange devices at the ground, and Kakashi instinctively knew they couldn't risk those things turning on. Outside the village gates, 100 strong force stood poised for the attack, kunai in hand. None of them mentioned the fact that the samurai and Konoha.Nin were already waiting, having been detected by their sensors. The only thing left to do was wait for the first strike. The Hitaki grimaced as memories of the war suddenly came back to him. Asuma and Kurenai exchanged a knowing look next to him. The Kunoichi suggested, "You two take the walls to the side, skirt around, climb up the side. They'll have guards prepared for such an eventuality, but they'll be no match for you two. Hinata and Shino have determined most of their forces here, waiting for us to make our move. The samurai will start the fight out here and hopefully create a diversion." When Asuma asked, "What about you?" the woman clutched her side, where the purple-haired shinobi had delivered a painful blow to her ribs. "I'll lead the samurai and the genin. My genjutsu will do better against so many enemies than your ninjutsu could. And besides, you two need to take on the daimyo's guards. I can only fight them to a deadlock." Kurenai had been unable to defeat the Nins because genjutsu and ninjutsu were useless against their chakra armor. Fortunately, she had the advantage because few of these shinobi wore the strong armor. Kakashi questioned, "What about the ones with the armor?" She gave a shrug. The young Aburame had already sent a swarm of his more resilient insects towards the unwary Yukigakure shinobi, saying, "Shino's Kakaichu and Kiba and Akamaru's Gatsuga, Fang passing Fang, should work well to create and locate weaknesses in the armor, respectively. Sasuke and Hinata's taijutsu should help them, as well. I'll make sure to keep an eye on them to see if they're struggling." Kakashi paused for a second. This plan didn't sit well with him, but the alternative was, "Alright, go." He had sat in this cell for hours, and hours before that when he was still unconscious. Naruto exhaled in relief as the daimyo opened the cell door as Kazuhana Dodo's figure approached his cell. Ino whispered, "They're almost ready," while she released his chains. She pulled the final chain loose, and he fell to the ground. "I'm just about to go to the village's walls. I've already freed Shika, and he's gone to provide backup for whoever is protecting Koyuki. Dodo sent 2 of those Tokuho, special Jonin, that attacked us to the ship." At his feet, she dropped his weapons. She gave him a key and a wink before turning to go, saying, "I need to go. They've got some kind of weapons on the walls that I need to sabotage somehow." He whispered, "Ino." Back to her. She whirled around and gave him a raised eyebrow. The expression on Dodo's face seemed strange. He grinned. "Good luck." She rolled her eyes, but before she left, he saw the smirk she returned. As he advanced, Naruto rolled his shoulders and flung a kunai into each hand. Game time. He hurled the 2 blades at Yuki.Nin, who was nearby, as he dashed through the icy hallways. The blades sank deep into the brains of the 2 shinobi, killing them instantly as they were caught off guard. Before he came across 2 enemy.Nin who were beyond such pathetic ploys, this process was repeated twice more. One drew a wakizashi, side inserted sword, from her back as the other kunoichi rounded on him, and he ducked. Naruto drew his own katana from its scabbard on his back, while the other woman pulled a katana of ice from the wall. The woman with the ice blade struck first, and as he parried, the ice of her sword tried to encircle his own. Naruto heated the blade just enough to fend off the Yuki nin's attack by channeling the little Kaden chakra he had left, just his mother's innate knowledge. The other kunoichi decided to attack at that precise moment, bending her smaller blade in his direction. Naruto quickly swung his katana to block, but he grimaced when the woman pushed past his guard and nearly knocked it out of his grasp. When he pulled a prescribed fuinjutsu, Chakra Bando, sealing art, Chakra Bind, from his pocket and placed it flat against his palm, he flipped backwards, summoning a kusari and carefully manipulating it to divert their attention. While the other woman parried his Kongo Fusa, the second woman, thinking she had caught his momentary distraction, threw herself at him. After realizing what he had done, the metal-wielding kunoichi attempted to yell a warning to her comrade, but the other woman was now too close to him to retreat. Naruto instantly spanked, using his other hand to propel the ice blade forward while his parry was weakened by only having one hand on the blade. Even as his kusari dissolved from lack of control, the woman flinched backwards, but not enough to make a decision. The Yuki-nin, who wielded the Hyuden, slumped in shock, losing access to her chakra. With a shriek of indignation, the other kunoichi hurled herself at him, and he found it difficult to block the swift, ferocious assault. The bound woman also leapt at him, but her blows were unsuccessful because she lacked a blade and chakra. He yelled, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu!" Shadow clone technique. As two swordless clones formed at his sides. They both swung kunai into their hands and charged the assailants. Fearfully, the weaker of the two stepped back from them, her chakra beyond her desperate, grasping hands. But as one of the Kage Bunshin fell on her, slicing and stabbing, she lost her balance and fell backwards, dazed and terrified. The rest of the kunoichi started to make hand signals. Her voice was full of hate as she yelled, "Kaden! Gokakyu no Jutsu, fire release, great fireball technique." Naruto nearly burst out laughing. Yuki no Kuni's Kaden nature? Oh, you poor woman. He signed for another technique, his own futon. Daitopa, wind release. Great breakthrough, which, thanks to his vast chakra reserves, easily overpowered her own technique and turned it back towards her. Despite the brief 15-second duration of the resulting fire, one of his clones was overwhelmed by the extreme heat and dispersed in a cloud of smoke. He noticed the woman lying on the ground, burned but still alive, whimpering in agony as the flames subsided. The other clone attacked the downed kunoichi while the Uzumaki looked on. The Bunshin twisted its kunai sharply, and there was a stab and a cry of pain. However, Naruto had already started to leave, heading down the hallway and in the direction of more adversaries. I really ought to find Chan's old sword. What on earth is this? Shikamaru pondered as he looked at the strange creation with disgust. A long line of carriages based on tracks that extended into the distance, all of them made of metal. A man wearing a different uniform than the others was leaning out of a window at the far end of the device, holding a cigar, while Shinobi continued to move off of it in the direction of the building while he watched. The Nara thought about what he could do. I have to figure out how to drive this thing after I kill him. It's not impossible, but if he could avoid it, it wouldn't be worth the risk. Or I could try to make him drive it by capturing him. But it's likely that he would fight back, perhaps destroying it or alerting someone else. A minute later, when no one else was left, the man called, "I know you're there," and the genin's eyes widened in alarm. A sensor. Using the Shunshin no Jutsu, body flicker technique, Shikamaru made a hand sign and advanced to the front of the train. He raised his bow staff, which Ino had brought him, and swung it in the direction of the man's head while spinning it in his hand. The man swerved back and reached for the controls to raise the door's window, but Shikamaru was faster and lodged his bow in the window to stop it from closing. With a slight shuffling motion, he cracked and smashed the window. Shikamaru temporarily dropped his staff to deflect the driver's kunai, which was aimed at his head, after he caught it in a well-coordinated move and sent it flying back at him. The man was unable to avoid the knife and it struck him squarely in the face. Shikamaru's eyes widened, and his throat began to swell. When he realized what he had just done, he suddenly puked. I had to choose between him and me, he thought shakily. I had to do it. With hesitation, the Nara heir approached the apparatus, retrieved his staff from the fragments of the broken window, and opened the door. The Konoha.nin pointedly looked elsewhere as the driver's body, genin, probably, fallen to the ground. Nevertheless, he managed to glimpse the man's lifeless eyes, which suddenly widened in fear. As he walked into the carriage and shut the door, the Konoha.nin saw a manual in an open drawer under the controls. Looking through it took only a few minutes, and he believed he could figure out the rest on the spot. Shikamaru looked at the map that was displayed on one of the screens. There's a line that goes straight from here to that place. There. According to Ino, Koyuki and the film crew were there. With the whir and groan of strange technology, he started to turn the transport on. As he fiddled with the controls, the train started to move forward, the metallic groaning intensifying. The Nara smirked as he looked at the map once more, verifying his path to the camp. They were only a few meters from Naruto, just outside Yukigakure, and he had no choice but to battle these foes rather than attempt to save his cousin. Sasuke brought his Chikudo up to block a blow at his side after ducking beneath a kunai. He swung beneath and around, passed through their defense, and struck the Chunin's armored chest with his blade. The man snorted, unhurt, and gazed cockily and maliciously into Sasuke's eyes. Going to need to do better than that, brat. Tomo spinning, Sasuke grinned. I already have. The Chunin didn't find it funny. He said, whatever, brat, and threw a kunai. It impacted the Yuki-nin behind him, who screamed in pain, and went through the Konoha without harm. Genjutsu. The Uchiha nearly let out a sigh at his foolish foe. Sasuke ignored the pain that came with the thought and muttered, really, have you never heard of the Sharingan before? The man said, the what? Before cocking his head slightly to the right to avoid a kunai that was approaching. The blade killed the Chunin instantly by embedding itself in the middle of his forehead before he could even be surprised. The Avenger turned away, looking for another foe to battle. This time, hopefully, someone will be able to identify and execute a Genjutsu. And locate Naruto. It would be nice to have a challenge. That would also be pleasant. The small, armored woman muttered, my apologies, and Kiba felt like screaming. He insisted, I'm your enemy, instead, fight me properly. The kunoichi became a little redder. She responded to Akamaru's Suga, passing Fang. With a clean side dodge, saying, I'm afraid I cannot do that, without blinking. Triad. Damn it. What on earth makes this moron a kunoichi? Kiba snarled. He then threw a kunai at her with the exploding tag attached, saying, take me seriously. Thanks, Naruto. In a flash, it exploded, sending a reverberating sound across the battlefield. She dodged again in response to neither taunt nor attack. The Inuzuka and his partner exchanged a look. Now, Akamaru. He yelled, Gatsuga. Fang passing Fang. And the two sprang at her in a flurry of sound and movement that she was unable to completely avoid. She cradled her chest and spat out a mouthful of blood after being knocked backwards. The woman's meat mask fell along with the chakra armor that broke apart over her chest. All of a sudden, she was leaking chakra and her body was tense and taut with anger. This is what I was looking for. He smiled and almost crowed. The genin instantly dropped to his hands and knees. Giju Ninpo. Shikyaku no Jutsu. Imitation Beast Ninja Art. 4 legs technique. Something in the Yuki. Nin's eyes solidified when he looked him in the eyes. She charged at him, and Kiba galloped back, exchanging blows with her. Slicing with claws. Biting with teeth, avoiding a palm to the face, twisting away from a follow. Up to the side, and sweeping kicks to the legs. Kiba winced as the taste of his own blood filled his mouth and his teeth met steel. Bitch. He flew after a side kick, but she was already on top of him, pelting his flying body with blow after blow. She avoided another Suga from Akamaru and kicked him to the ground. The kunoichi quickly jabbed Kiba in the face after flicking 3 senbon into the spaces between her fingers to form a fist. Only a silent cry of, futon. Daitopa, served as a warning before the short, diminutive woman was swept away like a leaf in a hurricane. The Inuzuka made a grimace. Oi, Shino, I had it sorted. When the Aburame said, she defeated you, why, you may ask, because you quite literally asked her tea. Shut up, Shino. As they battled their way to the daimyo, Kakashi and Asuma ran along the battlements, eliminating enemy.nin. From the skirmish in front of the walls, the sounds of battle reverberated upward, the terrain occasionally smudged by ice or fire. The two Jonin exchanged glances and accelerated their pace as the cries of the dying rose like a breath on the wind. An order ran along the battlements as they ran. Fire. What? Kakashi was shocked, but he was powerless to stop the Yuki.nin on the battlements from turning levers on the wall. Mounted devices. The devices exploded rather than launching kunai, as was their intended purpose. The Yuki.nin who were guarding them and their fellow countrymen on the walls were ripped apart by the shrapnel. Kakashi was barely able to avoid the flurry of malfunctioning machinery before Asuma bore him to the ground. The floor was covered in kunai that had fallen from the damaged machines. Thus, the two got up and sprinted towards the daimyo and his guard. Kazuhana Dodo commanded everyone gathered to stand down. in a loud voice. "Flee!" he exclaimed, causing the Nin's side to temporarily lose focus, which the Konoha.Nin and samurai army exploited. As a result of their leader's contradictory actions, the Nin's loyalty faltered and broke apart like a wave. In an attempt to gain clarification, Roga Nader hurried to his daimyo's side, further dividing the ranks and causing chaos. "Dodo! Sama!" exclaimed Nader. "Why are you ordering us to stand down?" No more words could escape the man's lips because Kakashi and Asuma decided to attack at that precise moment, striking at each man in a well-practiced unison. Dodo faced the shinobi and made the distinctive hand sign for the Shintenshin no Jutsu, mind-body switch technique, which Asuma was particularly accustomed to seeing. It was only recognized by the Hitaki due to previous missions in which they accompanied members of the Yamanaka clan. With ease, Sarutobi's two chakra blades cut through enemy shinobi as he turned and charged at the other guards. Kakashi let his attention wander to the one most dangerous foe. Once more, Nader descended upon him like a whirling storm of ice and kunai. Kakashi retaliated against the man by using his own steel to block attack after attack. For what seemed like an eternity, they battled, punch for punch, kick for kick, and blade for blade. Twist and turn and kick, slice and hack, parry and dodge. The Ukigakure no Shinobi Gashira, head ninja of the Hidden Snow, was growing weary of his opponent and losing ground to a more formidable foe. Kakashi was unencumbered, but his chakra armor weighed him down and made him slower and less nimble. The man quickly dodged backwards and backflipped in desperation before starting to make hand signals. Hyaden. Haryu Moko, Ice Release. Tearing Dragon Fierce Tiger, Nader yelled. As Ukigakure transformed into a massive dragon, the ice from its walls melted away, creating gaps in the defenses. His technique manifested itself in flight, turning to lash out at Kakashi with cold teeth. Asuma's stream of gunpowder for his Kaden. Heizekisho, Fire Release. Ash Pile Burning, briefly distracted him from his own fight, and the Hitaki looked to Nader, putting their trust in the Sarutobi to deal with the ice dragon. He caught a glimpse of Dodo's figure turning on his own guards and using Suiden ninjutsu and kunai to attack them. Knowing he would need his transplanted eye for his next move, Kakashi reached up and revealed it. He signed, Ox, Rabbit, Monkey, gathering lightning chakra for his final tactic. Raikage, Lightning Cutter. Dislodging the ice underfoot as he ran, he launched himself at Nader. As he traveled, the lighting chakra sang to him, Sharingan's eye flickering to the Nin's form and following him as he ducked bodies, jutsu, and kunai. As his opponent charged at him, the Shinobi Gashira backed away from his attack and tried to land a kick on his head. Bringing his Raikage forward to strike at his exposed side, Kakashi ducked beneath the man's desperate preemptive strike while holding his arm. Kakashi ran after his opponent as he ducked backwards, flipping in midair, hoping to catch him as he fell. When Asuma vanquished the ice dragon, Ino had already dealt with the guards. He then shunshined, body flickered, in the direction of the Nin, knocking him off balance and kicking him in the face, stunning him. Dazed and caught off guard, Nader could only watch in horror as Kakashi's technique tried to pierce his heart. He was shielded from the attack by the chakra armor, but the suit was fried and rendered unusable by the strong lightning chakra. The lightning bled from his arm a moment later, but the Hitaki just took a kunai from his belt and stabbed it through the remnants of the man's suit, reaching vital organs. As Asuma approached him while blatantly lighting a cigarette, Kakashi rose from his kneeling position and raised an eyebrow at the daimyo of Yuki no Kuni. Ino gave the two Konoha.Nin a wink and greeted them warmly when they arrived in Ukigakure. They sat in their own council of caution, the Hokage's office, which was secured. Tsunade scowled and questioned, who could it possibly be? Who among the Ikenban would directly betray the Hokage? Sarutobi smoked thoughtfully from his pipe. Unspoken among the three was the belief that the Anbu commander could also be implicitly trusted. Not Chiko. She is incapable of something so subtle. And not Shikaku or Choza, either. It's not in their personality types. Ibiki is too loyal to the current system to possibly work against it. Homura and Kaharu we can trust about as far as we can throw them, Tsunade muttered, ignoring Hiruzen's disapproving look. I know Akira. It seems unlikely he would be linked to this, but it's not something we can rule out. Heishi and Shibi. Jiraiya questioned, can anyone say they trust the Aburame? Truly? Why did they even join the village? It seems counter-intuitive when considering how isolationist they are. The Sandame gave a listless shrug. Both Nidame, Sama and Shodai. Sama warned me about the Aburame. Unlike the other clans, who were invited, The Aburame just appeared outside of the gates one day, asking to ally with Konoha. By then the other villages were already forming. Do you think they're capable of something on this scale? Duplicity for so long? Replied Tsunade. Sarutobi said, I'd argue anything is possible with the Aburame, quite candidly. We've never been able to get a read on them. Even the Yamanaka feared to enter their minds. Jiraiya interrupted, asking, what about Heishi? Surely one couldn't hide from his all-seeing eyes in such a tight space, and wouldn't he have been aware of the number of guards? Sarutobi let out a sigh. He should have been, and there is a Hyuga amongst the guards, invariably. Jiraiya frowned and asked, main branch or side branch? Hiruzen gave him a look. Side branch, always. What I want to know, Tsunade responded, is why Danzo is no longer on the go. Ikenban. You used to trust him implicitly. Hiruzen sighed at the fierce gaze of both devoted Sanin. Danzo's Anbu Root faction was ordered to disband after acting in direct defiance of my orders. Of course, in reality, they never did so, he continued, addressing their skeptical looks. However, the timing was so poor that I couldn't afford the resources to enforce the disbandment. The most I could do was remove Danzo from the go. Ikenban. That old warhawk has his fingers in more pies than we even know exist, Sarutobi. Sensei, and you know it, Tsunade continued. Holding a rival authority to the Hokage within Konoha is not to be borne. What could have possibly resulted in you allowing that? A rhythm. One more, and then. Jiraiya gave his chin a contemplative rub. It definitely fits Danzo's MO and it would explain why I vaguely recognized the chakra signature. Sarutobi gave a headshake. We already suspected that Danzo was linked to this. The spy in the meeting was likely one of his root. What we need to be concerned with is who his accomplice on the go. Ikenban is, and how he's doing this. We can't risk moving until we're certain. Tsunade asked, no joy on the research front? Jiraiya sighed as she and Sarutobi exchanged a glance and shook their heads. There's got to be some form of mind control we haven't documented yet. I'll go through my ancestors' records and see if I can find anything. The battle on the Yuki Nin's side ended once the Konoha shinobi entered the village. The morale of the remaining Yuki shinobis was severely damaged by the cooling corpse of Roga Nader, and Yuki no Kuni and Yukigakure were placed under new leadership as a result of Kazuhana Dodo's surrender, which was carried out by Ino. Kazuhana Koyuki was much more benevolent toward Konohagakure and her shinobi after they had rescued her from the Yuki.Nin and overthrown the government that had killed her father. For their valiant efforts to protect her, Shikamaru, Sakura, and Shoji, her guards, were rewarded with her admiration. Fortunately, Mizore and Fubuki's attack had been thwarted by the three genin working together. As a result, Kazuhana Koyuki was crowned king of her father's kingdom just 4 hours after the battle for Yukigakure started. Her first act as the new, albeit hesitant, daimyo was to have her uncle, Dodo, put to death. The second, which should come as no surprise, was to put the hex crystal in the apparatus for which it was made, a container that her father's most brilliant scientists had created. As she did so, the ice blazed brightly, and the cavern in front of her lit up in the shape of a snowflake. But even as she watched, the 4 massive stone obelisks that surrounded the crater lost their color, leaving only darkness. Koyuki let out a sigh. It was nothing, then. Warmth. As she stood, enthralled, a wave of warm air blew across her features, causing steam and condensation. Her discovery took place against the silent whir of technology, as a massive heat generator came to life. Impossible, however, as time went on, the snow melted, the ice thawed, a rainbow appeared, and her homeland transformed into what her father had imagined it would be. Springtime. A recording of her as a child played, and even though she couldn't recall the conversation, it still made her cry. But her third act as daimyo was less joyful, something she could not take pride in or find any joy in. Fearing the worst, she hurried through the medical facility's halls in Yukigakure after receiving a call from an urgent Irio.Nin. With a heavy heart, she walked into the room she had been directed to. Sandayu. She cried, the image of his injuries etched in her memory forever. Koyuki. Heim, the samurai said with a feeble smile. He pointed to the window outside and said, it turns out that I'm not as good with a blade as I remember, but you see? Your father, Sosetsu. Sama's gift has born the land anew. His eyes were losing light and life at a rapid pace, and she shook her head silently, unable to comprehend this latest, terrible loss. And as the world was beginning to light up. Even as the man's eyes gradually became less focused, his smile grew larger and more proud. Haru no Kuni, land of spring, what a lovely name. He coughed out blood between his lips, wheezing and in pain. Guard her well, Haim. Then he disappeared, leaving Koyuki by himself once more. Sandayu Asama. Yuki no Kuni's courtesan and devoted samurai. As he welcomed a new dawn for a desolate land, he was dead and carrying the burden of a nation's dreams. Sosetsu Kazuhana. Yuki no Kuni's devoted father and kind daimyo. His family and country fell apart around him, leaving him dead with the burned remnants of a bright future for his people. She was unsure of which of them she felt more strongly for, but she thought, they found something to value in this place. Perhaps worse, they hadn't objected. And now it's lush and beautiful, and they'll never get to see that. Koyuki thought that perhaps, just possibly, she could manage to care for this place after all, as she shed tears of genuine sorrow for the first time in years. For Sandayu and her father, the sun shone.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.